Long-distance night drives always put me in a strange headspace, somewhere between hyper-aware and dangerously hypnotized, where the road blurs into a tunnel of yellow lines and endless pavement. The night I saw the man, I was driving alone down a remote stretch of highway, somewhere in the desert between Albuquerque and El Paso. It was past midnight, and the sky was moonless, the darkness stretching in every direction, untouched by the glow of city lights. I had made this drive before, but never so late. It was the kind of road that felt abandoned even in daylight, a forgotten stretch of asphalt where nothing but long-haul truckers and restless wanderers ever passed through. There were no streetlights, no nearby gas stations, no signs of civilization except for the occasional faded mile marker standing crooked in the dirt. The first time I saw him, I barely registered it. Just a shape standing on the side of the road. A figure, motionless, positioned just beyond the glow of my high beams, its edges blurred by the night. At first I assumed it was some hitchhiker, maybe a stranded motorist waiting for help. But there was no car, no flickering hazard lights, no backpack at his feet. Just a man, standing utterly still, his face turned toward the highway. My stomach tightened instinctively, but I pushed the thought away. People hitchhike all the time, even in the middle of nowhere. I kept driving, my hands tightening around the wheel. The moment passed, the road stretched on, and I told myself that it was nothing. Then, exactly 2 miles later, I saw him again. This time I noticed the details. He was standing in the exact same position, arms hanging limply at his sides, shoulders slightly slouched. He was tall, unnaturally so, his long frame draped in tattered clothing that looked stiff, as if dried in the heat of the desert sun. His skin was pale, almost gray under the flickering light of my high beams, and his face, God, his face, was wrong. His eyes were hollow. Not just dark, not just sunken. Hollow. Like there was nothing behind them, just deep, empty pits where his gaze should have been. His mouth was slightly open, his lips cracked and dry, like someone who had spent too long wandering in the heat. His entire body was coated in a fine layer of dust, clinging to his hair, settling in the creases of his clothing. I felt an icy wave of fear crawl up my spine. This wasn't possible. I had been going at least 60 miles an hour. There were no side roads, no hidden paths through the desert where someone could have cut across and gotten ahead of me. But there he was, standing exactly 2 miles ahead of where I had last seen him. I forced my foot down on the gas pedal. The road stretched on, the darkness pressing in, the air in my car growing thick and stale. My knuckles were white against the wheel, my pulse hammering against my ribs. I kept telling myself it had to be a mistake. Maybe 2 different people, maybe a trick of the mind. But deep down, I already knew the truth. When I passed mile marker 6, he was there again, exactly where he shouldn't be. This time I saw something else. His head had turned. Before, he'd been staring at the road ahead, unmoving. Now his face was tilted slightly toward me, as if acknowledging that I had noticed him. I don't remember breathing. I don't remember thinking. I just remember the cold, suffocating weight of knowing I was being watched. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I kept driving, eyes locked on the road, waiting for the next marker, waiting for the moment I would see him again. But when I reached mile marker 8, he was gone. The stretch of highway where he should have been was empty, the desert yawning open on either side. For the first time in miles, I let out a breath, my body still rigid with fear. My fingers ached from how tightly I had been gripping the wheel. The road felt impossibly long, the silence pressing against my ears. I reached for my phone, my hand still shaking, and called the only person I could think of. "Hey, man," I said, my voice hoarse. "I need you to stay on the phone with me." It was my friend Eric, someone who had made this drive more times than I had. He sounded half asleep when he picked up, but the second he heard my tone, he was wide awake. "What's wrong?" I swallowed, my mouth dry. I think I just saw something. Someone. More than once. The silence on the other end of the line stretched. Then he asked, 2 miles apart? A chill ran through me. "How did you—" "I've seen him too." I felt my grip tighten on the wheel. "Who is he?" Eric exhaled, and for the first time since I had known him, his voice sounded genuinely unsettled. "There's a story about that road," he said. "An old one. No one knows when it started, but truckers, night drivers, people who take that route alone, they all talk about him. A man who stands by the road, appearing every 2 miles, always watching. They say he's a lost soul, someone who got stranded out there years ago. Some say he was a hitchhiker who never made it to his destination. Others say he's just stuck, trapped in a loop, repeating the same thing over and over." My hands were slick with sweat. "And why did he stop showing up?" Eric hesitated. "That's part of the myth. They say he follows you until you acknowledge him, until you realize he's there. Then once you know, the only way to stop him is to break the silence. Call someone. Let someone else know what you've seen." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. We stayed on the phone for the next hour, my heart still lodged in my throat, until I reached the safety of city lights, until the road felt real again. I've never taken that highway at night again. When I was 10, a new family moved into the house next door. Or at least, that's what everyone thought. It was a large, pale blue Victorian, old but well-maintained, with a wraparound porch and a yard full of towering oak trees. It had been empty for as long as I could remember. The kind of house people whispered about, claiming it was haunted, even though no one could say why. I had always thought that was just kid talk, until the lights turned on one summer evening, and my mom leaned out the window to say, "Looks like someone finally bought it." I was thrilled. I was an only child, and despite living in a suburban neighborhood full of kids, I had never had a friend who lived right next door. That changed when I met Daniel. I don't remember the exact moment we became friends, but I remember the ease of it. He was my age, thin and quiet, with dark hair that always seemed slightly damp, as if he had just stepped inside from the rain. His family, however, was different. I never saw them. Not once. Not when they moved in. Not when I was over at his house. Not even in passing. "Where are your parents?" I had asked once. "They're around," he had said simply, and I didn't press it. Because why would I? Kids don't question things the way adults do. When you're 10, the world is exactly what it looks like on the surface. And on the surface, Daniel was just a new friend with a big empty house all to himself. At first, I loved going over there. His house was massive, with winding hallways and doors that led to unexpected rooms. The furniture was older than my grandparents', the kind you weren't supposed to sit on, and the air always felt slightly cooler than it should have been, even in the middle of July. But I only ever saw one floor. Daniel never let me go upstairs. "We don't go up there," he had told me once, his voice light. as if that were an entirely normal rule. Even then, something about that felt off. But I let it go. Then one night, everything changed. We were playing in his living room, rolling marbles across the hardwood floor, when something thudded upstairs. It wasn't a creak or a settling noise. It was a footstep. I froze, staring at Daniel, waiting for him to say something, to acknowledge that we weren't alone. But he didn't even look up. Another step, and another. Slow movements, pacing back and forth above our heads. I whispered, "Who's upstairs?" Daniel's face didn't change, but his fingers tightened around one of the marbles. No one. A chill spread through my chest. I wanted to believe him, but I had heard it. Someone was moving just above us. And if it wasn't his parents, who was it? I didn't ask. I didn't want to know. The next time I came over, I asked if we could play outside instead. Over the next few weeks, I found excuses not to go inside at all. I didn't like how quiet it was, how even on the hottest days the house still felt cold, how I had started noticing that every door was locked, not just the front and back, but the ones inside too. Then, one evening, I was playing outside when I saw Daniel's bedroom light flick on. It was odd because I hadn't seen him all day, but I figured he was home now, so I ran up to the porch, about to knock on the door. Then I looked up, and Daniel was already outside. He was standing at the edge of his yard, staring up at his own bedroom window. I turned back toward the house, toward the window where the light was still on, where someone was standing behind the glass. Watching us, I couldn't make out their features, only the outline of a figure standing perfectly still. When I turned back to Daniel, he was already walking away. I never went inside his house again. Shortly after that night, Daniel's family moved out. No moving trucks, no for sale sign, just gone. The house sat empty for years, untouched, exactly the way it had been before they arrived. Then, one summer, another family moved in. They lasted 2 months. Then another family, and another. No one stayed for long. Now the house sits vacant again, the windows dark, the doors locked. But sometimes, when I pass by at night, I see a light flicker on upstairs. I've always been a restless traveler, the kind of person who prefers the open road to the comfort of home. There's something about being in motion, moving from place to place, that keeps me from feeling stuck. Over the years, I've stayed in countless roadside motels, some cheap, some run down, some decent enough that I barely remembered them the next day. But there's one I will never forget. It was in the middle of nowhere, tucked off a quiet stretch of highway somewhere in the Midwest. I had been driving for 10 hours straight, my vision hazy from exhaustion. And when I saw the flickering neon vacancy sign glowing in the dark, I pulled off without hesitation. The place was a relic from the past. One of those old-school motor lodges with peeling paint, a row of identical doors, and a front office that smelled like stale coffee and cigarette smoke. The clerk barely looked up as I entered, a middle-aged man with deep lines on his face and eyes that carried the weight of something unspoken. "Just one night?" he asked. I nodded, sliding my card across the counter. He hesitated for just a second. Not long enough for me to question it at the time, but long enough that, looking back, I realized he was giving me a chance to leave. Still, he took my payment, handed me a key with a small plastic tag that read Room 209 and muttered, "Try to get some sleep." Something about the way he said it put me on edge. I took my key and walked out into the night air. The motel was nearly empty, only 2 or 3 other cars parked near the far end of the lot. The wind was cold for summer, a sharp bite in the air that made my skin prickle. As I climbed the exterior stairs to the second floor, I noticed something strange. The other rooms had signs of life. A flickering TV behind one curtain, muffled voices behind another. But room 209, completely dark. I slid the key into the lock, feeling a strange resistance before the knob finally turned. The room smelled musty, like old carpet and forgotten air, the kind of scent that settles into a place when it's been left undisturbed for too long. The bedspread was an outdated floral print, the furniture a mix of faux wood and cigarette burns. A single chair sat near the window, its fabric faded, positioned as if someone had just been sitting there, watching the parking lot below. I set my bag down and closed the door, flicking on the bathroom light. The bulb buzzed for a moment before settling into a dim, yellow glow. As I splashed cold water on my face, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the mirror. And I froze. For just a second, there was someone else standing behind me. The image was blurred, indistinct, but I saw enough. The outline of a figure, too tall, too still, standing just outside the bathroom doorway. My breath caught in my throat as I spun around. The room was empty. I gripped the sink, my heart pounding, forcing myself to breathe. It was exhaustion, I told myself. A trick of the light. I had been on the road too long, but the feeling of not being alone didn't fade. I turned off the bathroom light and walked back into the room, the silence pressing against my ears. I reached for the lamp on the nightstand, but before I could turn it on, something moved in the corner of my vision. The chair by the window. It was facing the bed now. I knew for a fact I hadn't touched it. I swallowed hard, every instinct screaming at me to leave, to grab my bag and go. But I was exhausted, my body heavy with fatigue, and some stubborn part of me refused to be scared by an old chair. I turned on the lamp, climbed into bed, and pulled the covers up to my chest. I told myself I would sleep, that I would wake up in the morning and laugh at how easily I had let my mind trick me. Then, sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to a sound. Breathing. It wasn't mine, coming from somewhere near the foot of the bed. I didn't move, my entire body locking in place as I strained to listen. The sound was deep, unnatural, too close. I forced myself to turn my head, just enough to see, and I wished I hadn't. The chair by the window was no longer empty. Someone was sitting in it. A shape. Too dark. Too solid, hunched forward slightly, its head tilted in my direction. I couldn't make out any features, just the weight of its presence. The overwhelming certainty that it was watching me. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. I just lay there, staring, waiting, hoping it wouldn't move. And then it did. Not in a natural way. Not like a person shifting in their seat. It jerked, as if being pulled by invisible strings, its limbs bending in ways they shouldn't. The air grew heavier, suffocating, the room itself pressing in on me. Then, without warning, the light on the nightstand flickered and died. I couldn't see it anymore. But I could feel it. The mattress dipped slightly, as if something was leaning over me. I clenched my hands into fists, forcing myself to keep my breathing even, pretending I was still asleep, pretending I wasn't about to lose my mind. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take another second, the phone rang. The sound shattered the silence, piercing through the room like a lifeline. The weight lifted instantly. The air snapped back to normal, the crushing presence dissolving like it had never been there at all. I lunged for the phone, my fingers shaking as I pressed it to my ear. I didn't even get the chance to say anything. A voice, low, hoarse, urgent, whispered, "Check the closet." I hung up. I was out of that bed and grabbing my bag before I could even think. I didn't check the closet. I didn't check anything. I ran, my pulse hammering, throwing the door open and rushing down the stairs 2 at a time. The clerk at the front desk barely looked up as I tossed the key on the counter. "Leaving early?" he muttered. I opened my mouth, hesitated. I wanted to ask him. I wanted to demand to know what the hell was wrong with room 209. But the way he looked at me, like he already knew, made my blood run cold. So I just nodded. "Yeah." And I left. The next day, I looked up the motel on Google and I looked at the reviews. This one user mentioned room 209, and he described the same thing I went through. I left a review warning people to never come to this motel, especially room 209. I just know I'm never coming back here ever again. I used to work as a home inspector. It was a job that took me into some of the strangest, creepiest, and most unsettling places imaginable, like abandoned homes, foreclosed properties, places where people had up and vanished, leaving everything behind as if they'd intended to return but never did. But out of all the houses I inspected over the years, one in particular still sits on my mind. It was a small, single-story home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. From the outside, it looked like any other house. Clean siding, a well-maintained yard, a fresh coat of paint. It had been sitting vacant for over 6 months, and a young couple was looking to buy it. It should have been an easy inspection job, but from the moment I stepped inside, something felt off. The airway that suggested that no one set foot inside in months. Dust coated every surface, but there was no sign of pests, no rodent droppings, no cobwebs in the corners. It was almost too clean, like the house had been scrubbed down recently despite being vacant for half a year. As I walked through each room, taking notes and checking the usual spots for damage, I noticed small things that didn't add up. The refrigerator was unplugged, but inside, it was spotless. Not a single speck of mold or mildew. Usually refrigerators begin to grow mold and mildew when unplugged for long periods of time. Because of the sudden change in temperature, and no one had opened the refrigerator doors. The toilets still had water in them, but there was no smell of sewage, no stagnant scent from months of sitting unused. A bottle of dish soap sat next to the empty sink, as if someone had placed it there recently. Someone had been inside this house. I moved into the hallway, glancing down at the floorboards. There were no scuff marks, no dirt, no footprints in the dust. It was eerie, like the house had been lived in, but not by anyone who left behind signs of their presence. Then I reached the door to the crawl space. Every house has one, a small, dark space beneath the floors, usually accessible by a hatch or a side panel in the foundation. I hated checking them. They were always cramped, full of spiders, sometimes even housing small animals that had burrowed inside for warmth. This one was in the hallway, a simple wooden panel flush with the floor. But the lock was broken. That wasn't normal. Most crawl spaces didn't even have locks, let alone ones that had been forced open. My stomach twisted as I kneeled down, pressing my fingers against the panel. It shifted under my touch, sliding open far too easily. The smell hit me first. Not rot, not sewage. Something else, something human. Sweat. Stale breath. The unmistakable sour scent of someone who had been living in filth. I reached for my flashlight, flicking it on as I aimed the beam inside. The space was small, just tall enough for someone to crawl through, the dirt floor uneven, littered with old insulation and broken concrete. But as I swept the light from one end to the other, I saw it. A mattress, thin, covered in stains, the fabric ripped open in places. Next to it, a pile of clothes, filthy, crumpled, but unmistakably recent. A plastic bag filled with food wrappers, empty water bottles stacked neatly beside it. Someone had been living here. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The space was silent, but the air inside felt alive, like it was pressing in on me, waiting for me to make a move. And then I saw a single notebook. It was lying on top of the mattress, its cover wrinkled, the edges damp from the moisture in the dirt. Without thinking, I reached for it, my fingers hesitant as I flipped it open. The first few pages were nonsense, scribbles, repeated words, messy handwriting that barely formed coherent sentences. But as I turned the pages, I realized they weren't random thoughts. They were entries, dates, times, descriptions of the house, descriptions of the homeowners. I flipped further. My blood turned to ice, descriptions of me. I skimmed the last page, my heart hammering against my ribs. He's here, checking the house. He doesn't know yet. I slammed the notebook shut. The crawl space was too quiet, too still. The air was thick with the kind of silence that only happens when someone else is holding their breath too. My hands were shaking as I turned my flashlight toward the farthest end of the crawl space, where the shadows were deepest. The light caught movement. A foot, bare, pale, pressed against the dirt. Someone was in there with me. I scrambled backward so fast I nearly lost my balance. My boot hit the edge of the hatch and I slammed it shut, shoving my weight against it. My pulse was roaring in my ears as I reached for my tool belt, grabbing the first thing I could, a screwdriver, and jammed it into the broken latch, wedging it in place. I didn't wait. I ran. I sprinted out of that house across the yard and didn't stop until I reached my truck. My hands fumbled with the keys as I yanked the door open, my breath coming in sharp, panicked gasps. I expected to see someone burst out of the house behind me, expected to hear the hatch creak open as whoever was inside came crawling out. But nothing happened. The house sat there, quiet, empty, pretending to be normal. I didn't report it. I know I should have, but I didn't. And ironically enough, I never locked the front door behind me when I ran. I don't know if they stayed inside, if they slipped out the back the moment I left, or if they found somewhere else to hide. A few years ago, my younger sister went off to college, so I decided to move back home. Our dad had passed a few years earlier, and our mom had been living alone since then. She wasn't sick, but the house was too big and too quiet. The kind of silence that creeps in when someone's left behind like that, and it does something to you. I told my mom it would only be for a few months while I worked remotely and saved up for my own place. She was okay with it and acted like she didn't need the company at the same time. But I could tell it meant a lot to her. Honestly, the house hadn't changed. The same creaky stairs, the same hallway with lights that always flickered even after new bulbs, the same guest room with the floral bedspread and the draft that always found its way through the closed window. It felt familiar and strange at the same time, like stepping into an old photograph and realizing everything was frozen. But you. The first couple weeks were uneventful. My mom stuck to her routines, morning coffee, gardening, puzzles in the living room. I worked during the day and usually stayed up later than her, listening to music with headphones or watching TV in the dark while the house settled. Then one night, about 3 weeks in, I heard a noise that made me want to go back and live on my own. I had just turned off the living room lights when I heard the distinct sound of movement upstairs. slow creaks across the hardwood floor that sounded very sneaky. At first, I thought it was my mom, maybe going to the bathroom or grabbing something from her closet. But it was past midnight, and I knew for a fact she'd been asleep for hours. The sound stopped before I could decide whether to check it out. The silence that followed felt sharper, heavier, like the house was listening too. The next morning, I asked my mom if she'd been up. She shook her head. Didn't even wake once, she said, completely unfazed. That should have been it. An old house makes noise. I'd spent enough years there to know how the place breathes. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just wood settling. A few nights later, as I was brushing my teeth, I heard it again. This time, it was louder, more than footsteps. I was brushing my teeth when I heard what sounded like a door clicking shut upstairs. Not slamming, not creaking open, shutting, slowly and quietly. I stood there, toothbrush still in hand, staring at my reflection as the sound settled in my chest. I walked back upstairs to my bedroom. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from the nightlight in my mom's room. All the doors were closed, just as they always were. I checked my mom's door first, cracked open, as always. She was asleep. That night, I left a chair propped against the guest room door, just to see if anything moved. The next morning, the chair was pushed aside. Not knocked over, not dramatically tossed, just nudged a foot or two away, like someone had carefully moved it to avoid making noise. After that, I started locking the door. I bought a cheap wedge lock online, one of those rubber things you jam under the door from the inside. It made me feel better, even if I still didn't have a solid explanation for what I was hearing. A few days passed by again. It was just past 2 a.m., and I had woken up thirsty. I opened the door to my room, wedge still in place, and walked down the hall toward the stairs. That's when I noticed that the door to the hall closet, the one no one ever used, was slightly open. There was a small gap just wide enough to see the edge of coats and shelves stacked with old boxes. I froze. That door was always shut. My mom never touched it. I stepped closer, something cold pooling in my chest. I leaned in just enough to peek inside, and that's when I saw the edge of a foot, barefoot and pale, half concealed by an old winter coat. I didn't make a sound. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on the closet, my breath trapped in my lungs. I locked myself in my room. That night, I didn't sleep. I listened for movement, for any sign that someone had left the closet. But there was nothing. No footsteps, no doors, just silence. The next morning, I told my mom. I expected her to panic, to call the police, to at least check with me. But she just looked at me with a strange mix of concern and recognition. "I thought I saw someone once," she said softly, "a few months after your dad died. But I figured I was just seeing things. I didn't want to tell you girls. I didn't want you to worry." That day, we cleared out the entire house. Every closet, every crawl space, every cabinet. We never found anyone. But 2 days later, while taking boxes to the garage, I noticed something carved into the back wall of the tool closet. Scratched deep into the wood, in shaky, uneven letters. I never left. That was the last night I stayed there. I moved out a week later, and my mom followed a month after. I told my sister about what happened, and she remembers feeling something hover over her while she's sleeping. My mom sold the house a few months later. We haven't really talked about it since, and probably will not bring it up again. When I first moved into my apartment complex, I didn't think much of the storage units in the basement. Each tenant had one, labeled with their apartment number, set behind a thick metal door with padlocks that clicked heavily into place. It was a standard amenity listed on the lease next to on-site laundry and designated parking. To be honest, I was not concerned to the point where I hardly noticed them during the tour. At the time, I was more preoccupied with the feeling of starting over. I'd just broken off a long-term relationship, left a job I had outgrown, and relocated to a quieter part of town where everything felt slower, softer. The kind of place you go when you need to rebuild yourself without the noise of the world pressing in. The apartment itself was a modest one-bedroom, small balcony, faded hardwood floors that gave off a pleasant creak. It wasn't extremely new, but it was clean, and more importantly, it felt like it could become mine. The storage unit came up in my mind only after I'd been living there for about 3 weeks. I had boxes of off-season clothes, old books, and a few pieces of mismatched furniture that didn't fit the layout of my new place. One Saturday morning, I decided to make use of the space. I went down into the basement with a cardboard box wedged under my arm and a small padlock I'd bought the day before from Lowe's. The basement was colder than the rest of the building, not just in temperature but in tone. The overhead lights buzzed faintly and took a second too long to flicker on. The hall was lined with identical metal doors, each painted the same institutional gray and stamped with black numbers in a cheap peeling font. My unit was 1B, at the far end of the hallway. As I approached it, I noticed something odd. The unit next to mine, 1C, was missing a lock. Its latch hung open, swinging slightly as if it had just been disturbed. I paused. All the other units were securely fastened, locked tight, but 1C gaped slightly open, revealing just a sliver of darkness inside. I felt a faint curiosity then, but it was more reflex than anything else. A trick of human nature to glance toward what feels out of place. Still, I stored my box and moved on. Later that day, while returning from the grocery store, I ran into Amanda, one of my neighbors from the 3rd floor. She was friendly, the kind of person who always wore earbuds around her neck and smiled like it was second nature. "You settling in okay?" she asked, leaning against the railing as I unloaded bags from my car. "Yeah, slowly getting there," I said. "It's quiet, which I like." She nodded. "It's a good place, mostly older tenants. Some of the units have been empty for a while, though. Weirdly quiet on the 1st floor. You ever meet the guy in 1C? I blinked. 1C? Yeah. Right next to you, right? I don't think I've seen anyone come or go from there in months before him. I told her I hadn't either, that I didn't even know it was occupied. She just shrugged. Some people keep to themselves, I guess. That night, I thought about the storage unit again, the way the latch had swung open, the shadowed space behind the door. I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe someone had forgotten to lock it. Maybe it belonged to someone who'd moved out and left it unused. These were the kinds of excuses you tell yourself when your mind wanders into uncomfortable territory. But it started happening more than once. Every time I went downstairs to store something or grab an old jacket, 1C was unlocked. Never wide open, never overtly inviting, just ajar. The air around it always felt different, still, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. There was a faint smell, too. Not foul, not strong, just a damp, stale odor, like something stored for too long in a sealed box. Eventually, curiosity overtook me. One afternoon, I waited until the hallway was empty and knelt in front of 1C. I pushed the door open just slightly, letting it groan against the concrete floor. It was pitch black inside. I pulled out my phone, flicked on the flashlight, and swept the beam through the unit. There wasn't much, just a folding chair, positioned squarely in the center of the room, facing the door. Nothing else. No boxes, no shelves, no storage bins, Just the chair, as if someone had been sitting there, waiting. I closed the door and didn't open mine that day. A few nights later, I woke up to a very distinct sound. The sounds of metal on concrete. The kind of dragging noise that makes your stomach tense before your mind can explain why. I sat up in bed, heart already racing, straining to hear over the humming of my ceiling fan. The sound came again, rhythmic, heavy. The basement. Of course, I didn't go down there that night. I told myself I must have imagined it, that old buildings make strange noises when they settle. But the next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Something about the way it had echoed through the walls felt human. I checked my storage unit. Nothing had been disturbed. 1C, of course, was unlocked. This time I didn't go near it. I just stood in the hallway for a long time, trying to make sense of the unease crawling up my spine. Later that day, I spoke with Janet, the building manager. She was in her 60s, wore glasses on a beaded chain around her neck, and always seemed slightly distracted. When I mentioned the unit next door being open all the time, she raised an eyebrow. 1C? She asked. That's supposed to be locked up. No one's rented that unit in years. I frowned. But it's always open. There's a chair in there. Janet looked up from her clipboard. Are you sure? Yeah. Every time I go down there. She muttered something under her breath and jotted a note. I'll check it out this afternoon. Probably just some junk someone left behind. I wanted to ask more, who had used it last, why it wasn't secured, but her tone had shifted, subtly closed off, like she didn't want to continue the conversation. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the floor, every whisper of wind outside the window pulled at me, threading anxiety through my chest, making my anxiety slowly rise. It was close to midnight when I grabbed my phone and flashlight and walked downstairs barefoot, careful not to make noise. The building was dead quiet. My footsteps felt impossibly loud as I moved through the hallway and approached the unit. This time 1C was wide open, not ajar, not swinging, just open. The metal door folded completely back against the wall. Inside, the chair was gone. There was something else in its place, a tape recorder. I stepped closer, pulse rising, and crouched to get a better look. The recorder was old, dusty, the kind of cassette player you'd find in a thrift shop. There was a label on the front in faded handwriting. Play me. Against my better judgment, I pressed the button. The tape hissed to life. Static crackled for a few seconds. Then a voice, low, male, breathy, spoke. He watches when it's dark. He waits for them to stop checking. He waits for someone new. Another burst of static. Then, don't look at him. He knows when you do. The recording ended. I stared at the machine, my hand hovering over the stop button. There was no name, no explanation, just those words. I left the recorder there and backed away, suddenly aware of how exposed I was in that hallway, how far I was from anyone else. I closed the unit door and returned to my apartment, locking it immediately right behind me. The next morning, the storage unit was padlocked shut with a brand new industrial grade. Janet didn't return my calls after that. Her office door remained closed every time I passed by. And within a week, someone new was working the front desk. That was 6 months ago. I took my stuff out of the basement and never went back down there. So, I'm not really the type of guy who writes stuff like this. I'm not a storyteller. But something happened to me last year that I still haven't made sense of, and I figured maybe writing it out might help. Or at least, get it off my chest. It started with a car. A Kettozer Haram Honda Accord. Champagne gold, sun-faded in places, dented in others. The clear coat was peeling on the roof like dead skin, and there was this weird buzzing noise whenever you hit 45 miles per hour. It was my uncle's before he passed, and after some paperwork and a couple $100 in repairs, it became mine. Not flashy, but it got me to work and back without a fuss. The thing is, people kept trying to steal it. The first time, it was parked outside my apartment complex. I live in a decent area. Not rich, not dangerous, just sort of middle-of-the-road forgettable. I came out one morning and found the driver's side door slightly ajar. Nothing major looked disturbed. Radio still there, old gym bag in the back untouched. But the glove compartment was wide open, and the wires underneath the dash were a mess. Like someone had started trying to hotwire it and then got interrupted. I chalked it up to bad luck. Cops came, filed a report, and told me to invest in a steering wheel lock. So I did. 2 weeks later, it happened again. This time, it was in a grocery store parking lot. I'd gone in for 20 minutes, milk, eggs, frozen pizza, and came back to find the window cracked and a set of scratches around the lock. Whoever it was had tried to get in, failed, and taken off. Now, you might be thinking maybe old Hondas are easy targets. You'd be right. They're notorious for it. But something about this felt personal, or at least persistent in a way that didn't feel random. I started getting paranoid, parked under lights, avoided side streets, started double-checking the door every time I got out. Still, every few weeks, there was something. A scratch that hadn't been there the day before. A door left slightly ajar. Once, I swear the seat was in a different position than I'd left it. Like someone had moved it back and forgotten to put it the way I had it. I told my buddy Marcus about it, kind of laughing it off like it was just some weird running joke from the universe. He's the one who said it, half joking. Maybe there's something in the car worth stealing. I laughed at the time, but now, looking back, man, I don't even know. So at this point, I'm low-key on edge every time I go out to the car. I started driving with a pocket knife in the console. Dumb, I know, but there was something about the consistency of the break-ins that started to feel intentional. I even asked around. Neighbors, co-workers, some guys at the auto shop, if anyone had ever heard of stuff like this. Most people shrugged it off. It's just a Honda, they'd say, or maybe it's just kids messing around. I didn't have anything valuable in there. I wasn't running drugs or cash or whatever you might be thinking. I didn't even have Bluetooth. Just old upholstery and a trunk full of jumper cables and broken umbrella ribs. Still, the break-ins didn't stop. One night, I parked at a friend's place downtown. It was a Friday. I stayed a little too late. And when I came back the next morning, bam. Rear window smashed in. This time, someone had really gone through it. They'd yanked the back seats forward, pulled up the carpet, even messed with the paneling under the dash. But they didn't take anything. Not the bag of laundry in the back. Not the pair of shoes in the passenger footwell. Not even the loose change in the cup holder. It was like they were looking for something. Something specific. That's when I stopped thinking it was coincidence. I filed another police report. The officer looked tired, like he was going through the motions. He nodded a lot, didn't write much down. I asked him if there was a pattern of thefts like this. Same car, same model. He said, yeah, sure. Sometimes parts get stripped and resold. But I told him the stereo was untouched. Airbags were still there. Engine wasn't touched. He looked at me and just said, probably scared off. I wasn't buying it anymore. So I did something stupid. I decided to sleep in the car. Just once. I figured what were the odds they'd try it again, right? And if they did, maybe I'd get a plate. A face. Something. It was a Wednesday night. I parked in my usual spot, angled under the streetlight, windows just barely cracked. Brought a blanket and a thermos of coffee like I was preparing for a stakeout in a bad movie. Nothing happened. Until just after 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of my door handle being tested. Quiet, slow, like whoever it was had no idea I was inside. Then I saw the silhouette. Slim build, hoodie, gloved hands. They crouched next to the driver's side door and started working the lock with something small. Maybe a pick. I froze, and then they looked up. The guy's eyes met mine through the glass. For maybe 2 seconds, we both froze. I don't know what my face looked like, but his? It wasn't panic. It wasn't shock. It was disappointment. Like he wasn't expecting me to be there, but me being there was just a delay, not a deterrent. He was gone before I could even grab the handle. I jumped out and ran after him barefoot, adrenaline carrying me down the sidewalk like I had any chance of catching him. But he'd already turned the corner by the time I hit the curb. That was the last straw. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove straight to my uncle's old house. He'd passed 2 years back, like I said, and most of his stuff had been cleared out and sold by then. But his garage was still there, mostly empty, locked up, and full of dust. I pulled in and started tearing the car apart. I mean, really tearing it apart. I took out the seats, peeled back the carpet, unscrewed the lining in the trunk. I pried open every panel I could find, took off the glove compartment, even pulled out the stereo system that hadn't worked in years. Nothing. No secret compartments, no drugs, no wads of cash, no mysterious envelopes tucked behind insulation. Just bolts, rust, and the ghost of old cigarette smoke that would never fully leave the fabric. I sat on the garage floor for over an hour, staring at the mess I'd made and feeling like an idiot. Whatever they were looking for, I figured, maybe it wasn't there anymore. Maybe it never was. Maybe it was some mistake. Maybe my license plate was similar to someone else's. I started reassembling everything, trying not to think too hard. A few quiet weeks went by. No scratches, no signs of tampering. The car was quiet again. I stopped carrying the knife, stopped looking over my shoulder. I almost let myself relax. And then I got into the accident. Wasn't my fault. Some guy blew a red light and hit my rear quarter panel going 40. It wasn't a huge crash, enough to spin me, pop the airbags, crunch the driver's side. I was bruised up, wrist probably sprained, but I walked away. Tow truck came. Insurance called. You know how that goes. But here's the thing. The mechanic called me a couple days later, sounding weird. He asked if I'd ever done any aftermarket mods to the car. I told him no. Why? He said, while they were stripping the interior to assess the damage, they found something under the back seat, not under the cushion, under the metal frame. I drove straight to the shop with my wrist still wrapped in a makeshift brace and that sick, nervous energy buzzing under my skin. The guy at the garage, Miguel, was waiting for me in the office, arms crossed, looking like he'd been debating whether to call the cops or not. He didn't say much, just nodded for me to follow him, and led me to the bay where my car was sitting half-gutted. The seats were out. The back paneling was stripped, and on the ground next to it was this weathered, industrial-looking metal case, maybe the size of a microwave, duct-taped along the seams and caked in grime. "You want to tell me what this is?" he asked. Not accusing, but definitely suspicious. I have no idea, I said, which was the truth. I didn't even know it was in there. He studied me for a long second, then shrugged. We didn't open it. Thought it might be sensitive. That word landed strange. I knelt beside the case. The thing had weight to it. I could feel it before even lifting. The metal was cold, edges dulled, like it had been handled often. The only clue was a small engraving on the corner, a string of numbers faded almost beyond recognition. With Miguel watching from a cautious distance, I peeled the tape and slowly cracked it open. Inside were stacks of cash, not like a few bundles, not like a stash from someone dealing weed on the side, organized, vacuum sealed in tight plastic bricks. The bills looked real, aged but crisp, dozens of them, packed tightly with surgical precision. I just stared. Miguel let out a low whistle. "That's cartel money," he said under his breath. "Has to be." I didn't say anything. I was still trying to process what I was looking at. It was too much, too perfectly hidden. My mind ran wild. Was my uncle involved in something? Did he hide it there before he died? Did someone else use the car to move money and forgot about the stash? Or was someone out there still looking for this? The break-ins, the scratches, the lockpicks. Someone knew. Miguel stepped back. "You didn't see this here. You should go." He didn't have to say it twice. I loaded the case into my trunk and drove home, heart hammering the entire time. I parked a few blocks away, kept checking my mirrors, wondering if someone was following me. My head was swimming with options. Call the cops, turn it in, keep it. But one thought pushed through all the rest. Who else knows it was found? Because if it wasn't just forgotten money, if someone had stashed it there for a reason, they were probably still watching. I didn't sleep that night. I don't even think I blinked. I just sat on the floor of my apartment, staring at the case, now hidden under a pile of towels in my bedroom closet, and tried to figure out how my life had become this. I kept turning everything over in my mind. If someone had been after that money all along and they knew it was in my car, then why hadn't they taken it? They'd had chances, too many to count. So what stopped them? Did they think I knew? Were they waiting for me to move it? Were they planning to take me out altogether? Around 5 a.m., I got up, locked every window, shoved a chair under the doorknob, and crawled into bed with the light still on. The next morning, I called in to work again, told them my car was totaled and I had a minor concussion. They didn't ask for details. I guess I didn't sound like I was lying, even though I was lying about all the wrong things. Then I did the thing I swore I wouldn't. I Googled what to do when you find a pile of drug money. I went deep. Forums, Reddit threads, sketchy articles. Most people said the same thing. Don't keep it. Don't touch it. Don't even breathe near it. If it was cartel related, which, let's be real, it probably was, then someone, somewhere was missing it, and that someone likely wouldn't be the forgiving type. Still, I couldn't bring myself to turn it in. It wasn't just greed. It was something else. Curiosity, maybe. Defiance. This wasn't some duffel bag I'd found in a park. It was in my car. A car that belonged to my uncle. A car that, for whatever reason, someone had been obsessed with stealing, but never quite did. That night, I checked my phone obsessively. No weird calls. No texts. No one following me when I went out for groceries. But then, As I was getting into bed, I saw a sticky note on my windshield. Just 2 words, "We'll talk." I didn't sleep at all. I kept looking through the peephole every 10 minutes, flinching at every noise from the hallway. I thought about leaving, just packing the case and driving until I ran out of road. But something told me that wouldn't help. Whoever had left the note knew where I lived, where I parked. They'd probably known for a while. The only thing left to do was wait and wonder what the hell I was actually tangled up in. They showed up the next day. Not in the middle of the night, not with ski masks or weapons or black sedans. It was 2 guys in a silver Camry, dressed like contractors. Jeans, boots, plain ball caps. They parked across the street from my building, waited for me to come out, and approached like they were trying not to make a scene. The taller one spoke first, calm, measured. "Anthony?" I didn't answer. Didn't need to. I guess the look on my face gave me away. "We just want to talk," he said. "That's all." They didn't threaten me. They didn't show a badge or pull a gun. Just asked if I had found anything unusual in the car after the accident. Asked if I'd come across something that didn't belong. When I stayed quiet, the shorter one took a small breath and said, "That money isn't yours. You understand that, right?" I nodded slowly, but something in me was beginning to burn. They explained enough to fill in the blanks. My uncle, who I thought had been a quiet mechanic with no kids and a fondness for watching baseball in his recliner, had been sitting on something much bigger. Years ago, he'd done a job. Just one, they said. Moved money for a group they didn't name. The kind of people who don't leave paper trails or second chances. But something went wrong. He didn't drop off the package where he was supposed to. Didn't take the payout either. He just kept it. Kept it and locked it inside the frame of a car. Covered it in rust and cigarette smoke. Passed it on like it was just another hand-me-down. And then he died. Heart failure. Natural causes. But that money? It was never forgotten. "These guys," the tall one said, "they're not the forgiving type. You don't want this to stay in your possession." I asked him if they were the ones who had been trying to steal the car. He didn't answer. Just gave me a look that said I already knew. I handed over the metal case the next morning, placed it in the back of their car without a word. They nodded once and drove away. That was 6 months ago. Since then, nothing. No visitors, no notes, no one tailing me. The car was totaled, so I bought a used Civic. Drives fine. No scratches, no lockpicks, just silence. Okay, so this happened about 2 years ago, and I haven't talked about it much. Mostly because it sounds fake as hell when I try to explain it out loud. But lately I've been thinking about it a lot again. Mostly because I still dream about that damn hallway. At the time, I was working a bunch of odd jobs just trying to pay off some debt and get by. One of those gigs was an overnight shift at a self-storage facility just outside of the town I used to live in. Sawyer's Self-Storage. Kind of tucked between a rundown strip mall and an abandoned car dealership. You wouldn't really notice it unless you were looking for it. They hired me through a temp agency. It wasn't glamorous. I sat in a tiny office with an ancient computer and a monitor that looped through black and white footage from the 12 security cameras around the property. My main job was to be a warm body after hours. If someone tried to break in, I was supposed to call the cops. That's it. No patrols, no rounds. Just sit there, stay awake, and look vaguely authoritative. The pay was decent and I could bring books or my laptop, so I didn't complain. I only ever saw the manager twice. Once when I got the keys, and once when I returned them. Everything else was done by email. That was my first red flag, honestly. The second red flag was the customer in Unit 666. Now, most units stayed pretty quiet after 9 p.m., and I could usually tell who came and went during the day based on the logs. But 666 was weird. Someone had been accessing it almost nightly, between 2:30 and 3 a.m., but I never actually caught them on camera. I could hear the gate code being punched in from the little box outside the office, and then the monitor would flicker like it always did when someone came through. But the camera aimed directly at 666 never picked anything up. Just static. At first I thought it was a glitch. The cameras were old and the tech was barely holding together. But when I told the manager, he brushed it off. Said 666 was paid up for the year and some renters liked their privacy. That was the end of it. Until one night, I got curious, and I made the mistake of walking down to 666 myself. It was a little after 2:30 a.m. when I heard the gate click open. You could always hear it. It gave off this low mechanical groan, followed by a metallic thunk as it unlocked. I glanced at the monitor. Sure enough, the camera for the gate blinked and reset like always. Someone had entered a valid code. I watched as the exterior lights near the fence lit up one by one, triggered by movement. But once again, when the feed rolled over to camera 7, the one pointed directly at Unit 666, all I got was that weird fuzz, static. It looked different than the usual kind of interference. There were these little spikes in the feed, like shadows moving across the screen, but not shaped like people, almost like they were too long in one direction, or too fast to follow naturally. Every time I tried to squint and make out a form, it'd vanish, replaced by grainy static again. I should have stayed in the office. I knew that. I really did. But curiosity's a hell of a thing. And something about that unit just made my skin crawl in the kind of way that you either ignore or investigate. Stupidly, I picked the second option. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out into the night. The air smelled weird, like cold concrete, copper, and faintly like mildew. I chalked it up to the weather, maybe some stagnant water somewhere on the property, and kept walking. The lights flickered overhead as I made my way down the main row of storage doors. Most of them were closed up tight with fresh locks. A few had keypads on the doors. People with more expensive stuff, I guess. The path to 209 was toward the back. There were fewer lights back there, and one of the bulbs had been burned out for weeks. As I turned the corner and approached the unit, my flashlight started acting up. It dimmed, not flickered, not died completely, just dimmed. Like the batteries were being slowly drained, or like something was pressing against it from the inside. I tapped it a couple times, but nothing changed. That's when I saw the door to Unit 666. It was open. Just a little. Maybe 2 inches, tops. But enough that I could see it hadn't been locked. Enough that someone had either come out or was still inside. Now, I want to be clear. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I didn't plan on going in there or snooping around people's stuff. But I figured if someone was inside and not supposed to be, I could at least peek in and maybe yell something. Make it clear they weren't alone. So I stepped closer, and that's when I heard it. Something moving inside the unit. Not footsteps, shuffling. At first I thought it might have been rats, or maybe the wind. The sound was low and soft, fabric brushing against something, plastic crinkling. I couldn't place it, but the shuffling came from deeper inside the unit, just past the strip of darkness where the overhead lights didn't quite reach. I stood there, flashlight pointed at the door, still dim but holding steady. I considered turning around, maybe even running. I knew I could go back to the office, lock the door, and pretend none of this happened. But something kept me there, part fear, part curiosity, and a small part of me that felt like I needed to know what was going on inside that damn unit. So like a moron, I leaned in. I didn't step over the threshold. I didn't want to break any rules, or whatever line my instincts were screaming at me not to cross. But I crouched down and tried to peer in through the gap. Inside, it didn't look like any storage unit I'd seen. There weren't boxes or bikes or piles of junk. Instead, the floor was covered in plastic sheeting, the kind you'd use for painting, or for keeping blood from soaking into the concrete. And along the far wall, just barely visible from my angle, was a long folding table. On it, something metal, something that looked like gloves. A pile of what I swear looked like photos. I didn't get a good look, just quick flashes lit by my fading flashlight. But the moment I saw that table, something in me shut down. My whole body locked up, and I just knew something was horribly wrong. Then I heard it again. That same shuffling, but this time it was closer. And it wasn't just shuffling anymore, it was wet, like something dragging across the floor. I didn't wait. I didn't think. I stood up and backed away so fast I nearly tripped over my own feet. I pulled the door shut, not slamming it, just enough to close it quietly. And then I walked. Fast. No running, no drawing attention, just head down, breath shallow, feet moving. When I got back to the office, I locked the door behind me and watched the monitors like my life depended on it. Camera 7, still static. Nothing showed up for the rest of the night. No more gate activity. No more sounds. But that plastic sheet, the metal table, I didn't imagine that. And when the sun came up, I walked back out there to check if the door to 209 was still unlocked. It wasn't. The padlock was back in place, like nothing had ever happened. I didn't sleep that day. I kept replaying what I saw in my head, over and over. The plastic on the floor, the table, the sound. I tried to tell myself I was being dramatic, that maybe it was some art freak or weirdo who liked to do photo shoots at 3 a.m. in a dark storage unit. But that voice in the back of my head, the one that usually whispers but was now yelling, knew better. I wasn't scheduled to work the next night, but I drove back to the storage place anyway. I sat in my car across the street around midnight, watching the building like it might twitch or flinch if I stared hard enough. At 2:28 a.m., the gate opened again. Same code, same flicker on the camera, same damn dead zone on camera 7. No one walked in, or at least I couldn't see them. And just like the night before, the gate closed again 3 minutes later. Exactly 3. I waited until 4, then drove home, fully unsettled. When I showed up for my shift 2 nights later, I found an envelope on the desk. No name, no stamp, just a plain manila envelope, placed neatly in the center of the table. I picked it up and opened it. Inside were prints of security camera stills, ones I'd never seen before. They showed the walkway outside Unit 209. Same angle, same timestamp as camera 7, but these weren't static. These were clear. And there was someone in the pictures, tall, thin, wearing a heavy coat despite the warm weather, head down, long dark hair. Could have been anyone, until I looked at the last photo. It showed the figure standing in front of my office window. Same timestamp, same night I walked to 666. I checked the monitor recordings, but camera 3, the one facing the office, was blank from 2:30 to 2:33 a.m. Just 3 minutes of black screen. I don't scare easily, not usually, I've worked late nights in worse neighborhoods, handled drunk weirdos in convenience stores, even been mugged once. But something about this was different. It felt orchestrated, intentional, like someone wanted me to know they'd been close. I sent an email to the temp agency and the facility manager that night saying I was done. I didn't ask for final pay. I didn't even wait for a reply. I packed up my stuff and left before my shift ended. I figured that would be the end of it. And for about 3 weeks, it was. Then the cops showed up at my apartment. The knock came around 8 a.m., just as I was getting out of the shower. 2 detectives in plain clothes, 1 male, 1 female. They showed me their badges and asked if I had a few minutes to talk about Sawyer self-storage. I invited them in, trying to keep my voice steady. I hadn't done anything wrong, but something about 2 detectives standing in your doorway at sunrise just screws with your balance. My apartment suddenly felt smaller, like the walls were leaning in. They didn't waste time. The woman did most of the talking. She asked if I had worked the night shift there, if I had access to the surveillance feeds, if I had ever noticed anything unusual around Unit 666. I nodded, told her the basics, mentioned the weird gaps in the camera footage, the late-night visits, the open unit with the table and plastic. I didn't bring up the photos in the envelope right away, though. I needed to know what they knew first. That's when she handed me a photo. Color print. Looked like a screen grab from one of the higher-resolution outdoor cameras. A face, half-shadowed, but clear enough. You ever seen this man before? And there he was. Same long coat, same heavy frame, same hair that hung too far forward, obscuring half his face. The man from 666, the one who had stood outside my office. I nodded. She gave me a long look. He used a fake name. Leased Unit 666 for almost a year. Paid cash through a P.O. box. We traced a burner phone number back to the login terminal. That's how we found you. I finally asked the question. What was in the unit? The male detective spoke for the first time. We believe he was using it as a site for dismemberment. That word hit me like a brick. Not storage. Not weird art. Dismemberment. They had found bone fragments in the concrete drain behind the unit, a tarp buried under the floor panels, chemical burns on the walls, and in a small cooler shoved behind a false panel, there were human remains, wrapped in shrink wrap, dated like leftovers. The detectives didn't go into much more detail. They didn't have to. My stomach was already turning. The man was still out there, they said. No confirmed address. No family. No digital footprint. They'd been tracking him through a string of similar sites. Mostly isolated storage facilities. Most of them paid in cash. Most of them now crime scenes. And somehow, he knew I had gotten close. That envelope on the desk, they hadn't left it. I moved out of my apartment 2 weeks later. Didn't tell the landlord why. Didn't tell my friends either. I packed up everything that could fit in my car and drove until I hit a town where no one knew my name. Got a room above a diner and started working night shifts somewhere else. Somewhere with windows, other people, and locks that actually made me feel safer. But I haven't really slept through the night since. Not because I think he's coming back. Not exactly. It's more like I know someone out there remembers me. Someone who stood on the other side of a glass window, watching me sit behind a desk, totally unaware of what I was looking at. Someone who probably heard me when I walked down that row of units. Someone who shut that door after I left and stood in the dark, knowing they were only 2 inches away from being discovered. And they still walked away. The cops never found him, not officially. They raided 4 more storage sites in other states, all connected by burner phones and payment drops. Same layout, Same evidence, same silence. The profile matches a few cold cases, but no name, no face. Just fragments of something that once was a person, if you can call them that. And what really gets to me, what keeps my chest tight when I turn off the lights, is that envelope. Because I still don't know how he got in. The office was always locked. I always had the keys on me. And yet, somehow, there it was. An envelope on the desk with photos he wanted me to see. Or maybe he just wanted me to know. Know that I got close. Know that I had stood right outside that door. Know that for a few terrifying seconds I'd nearly seen too much. But I didn't. And that was enough for him. Sometimes I wonder if that's how he picks people. If he watches, waits, and lets you look, but only for a second. Like some kind of horrible test you didn't know you were taking. I still dream about that unit. I see the door half open. I see the plastic. I hear the wet shuffling sound. But I never see him. Never fully. I don't know if he'll ever come back. I don't know if I'll ever end up on some list, years from now, as one more missing person in a quiet town. But I do know this. If you work night shifts anywhere, you should trust your gut. If the camera glitches, log it. If the door creaks, check it. And if you see something that feels wrong, don't convince yourself it's nothing. Because sometimes it's exactly what you think it is. I'm not really the type to write these kinds of posts, and honestly, I wouldn't have even thought to share this if it hadn't been for something I heard the other day. But we'll get to that. This all started last fall when I moved into a little rental on the edge of a town I won't name. It's not that I'm scared to, it's just that if someone from here reads this, they'll know exactly what I'm talking about, and I'm not trying to start anything with people who seem real good at keeping things quiet. Anyway, I just moved back to the area after years away, trying to reset my life after a rough breakup and a burnout-inducing job in the city. My lease was up, my savings were thin, and the house, a single story with faded blue siding and a sloped backyard, was cheap enough that I didn't ask too many questions. My only real requirement for a place was that it be dog-friendly. I've got a golden retriever named Charlie. He's calm, friendly, a little too trusting for his own good. But honestly, probably the only reason I didn't fall apart during the mess I just came out of. A few days after settling in, I found the dog park. It wasn't listed on any maps or signs, just a worn path through a break in a chain-link fence behind the grocery store. A woman walking a terrier told me about it while we chatted in line one day. She said the locals used it all the time, that it was cleaner and quieter than the bigger parks near downtown. She was right about that. The first time Charlie and I went, I actually thought we were in the wrong place. It didn't look like a public park. The gate was rusted, the sign half fallen and sun-bleached. There were no trash bins or benches, just open space surrounded by dense trees. But the moment we stepped through, Charlie took off like he'd found heaven. Nose down, tail wagging, full sprint into the open clearing. And I noticed something weird then. The other dogs, because yes, there were other people there, a few regulars scattered across the grass, none of them barked. Not once. They ran, sure, played, chased each other. But it was like watching a scene on mute. Just paws against dirt, the occasional jingle of a collar. No barking. I thought maybe it was just a weird coincidence. Dogs have moods like people do. Some days they're just quiet. But it didn't change. Not the second time, not the third. No matter what time of day I went, no matter who was there, the dogs never made a sound. It didn't bother me at first. I chalked it up to some strange local coincidence, like maybe all the dog owners in this town just happened to raise their pets to be ultra chill. Maybe that's what happens when you live away from sirens, car horns, and other dogs barking through apartment walls. Charlie didn't seem to mind either. If anything, he loved that place. But then I started noticing the people. It was never crowded, which was fine by me. Usually 4 or 5 other dog owners at most, the same ones too. I started recognizing them after a few visits. An older man in a flannel coat and ball cap, a middle-aged woman with thick glasses and a rat terrier, 2 guys who never spoke a word but always came and left at the same time, standing near the trees like they were watching for something else entirely. They weren't rude or anything, just distant, friendly in that small nod and nothing else kind of way. I'd say hello, they'd nod. I'd try to compliment someone's dog and they'd smile. Sort of, but it wouldn't go further. And even stranger, no one ever brought treats. No toys, no leashes were clipped to belt loops or bags. When they arrived, they'd unhook their dogs, walk into the clearing and just wait. Like they weren't there to socialize or exercise their pets. Like they were there for something else. One time I showed up with a tennis ball to throw for Charlie. Thought it might help him burn some of that golden retriever energy. First throw, he chased it like usual. Second throw, something changed. He stopped halfway, stared off toward the tree line, then turned around and walked back to me. No ball. I looked at where he'd stopped. Nothing there. No squirrel. No person. Just shadows in the trees. The next time we went, I left the ball at home. One day, while walking back to the car, I tried to make small talk with the guy in the flannel coat. Just something dumb like, "Nice weather, huh?" He looked at me for a long second and said, "You new here?" I nodded. Moved into the rental just a couple blocks over. He said, "Then listen to me, all right?" He pointed a crooked finger back toward the park. "Don't let your dog off leash near the trees. You hear me?" I nodded, slowly, not knowing what else to say. He turned and walked off. I stood there with Charlie for a second, unsure of what just happened. The sun was already starting to dip behind the trees, painting everything gold and amber. And for the first time, I realized I couldn't hear any birds, just leaves shifting in the wind, and a silence that somehow felt crowded. After that conversation, I didn't go back for about a week. I told myself it was the weather, or work, or just laziness. But really, it was what that guy had said. Don't let your dog off leash near the trees. I kept thinking about it, replaying the tone in his voice, the way he didn't sound concerned so much as resigned. Then Charlie started acting weird. He'd still get excited whenever I grabbed the leash, tail wagging, doing that little hop he always did when he knew we were going out. But once we were in the car, driving in that direction, he'd get quiet. His ears would flatten. He'd start panting lightly, even with the windows down, even in cool weather. And the moment we'd pull into the gravel lot behind the grocery store, he'd refuse to get out of the car. He'd just sit there, tail tucked, watching the break in the fence where the path began. I had to lift him out of the car the last 2 times we went. The park itself hadn't changed, but it felt different. Heavier. I know that sounds weird, but it's the best way I can explain it. Like the pressure shifted the moment you stepped through the gate, like you'd walked underwater. One evening, right before sunset, I took him again. I was thinking maybe it had all been in my head. Maybe Charlie just sensed my nerves and was picking up on it. We were the only ones there, That was a first, and despite everything, I unhooked his leash. He didn't run. He didn't sniff the ground or chase invisible rabbits like he usually did. He just stood beside me, eyes locked on the far tree line. And then he growled, low and long and real, not playful, not uncertain. The kind of growl that rumbles out of a dog's chest when something isn't right. I squatted beside him and looked in the same direction. It was darker there than it should have been. The trees were dense, sure, but the shadows were wrong. Too tall, too still. Then I saw it. Or more accurately, I stopped seeing what should have been there. There was a spot, about 10 feet wide, where the trees didn't sway with the wind like the rest. The branches didn't shift. The shadows didn't flicker. It was just still, like a gap in the world, but one that was wearing a disguise. Charlie started backing up. I grabbed his leash and we left without looking back. That night, he refused to sleep in the bedroom, sat by the front door, eyes fixed on it until morning. Sometime after midnight, I swear I heard scratching, not on the door, on the window. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I laid in bed, eyes half open, listening for more scratching that didn't come. Just the creaks of the house settling, a few wind gusts outside, the occasional car passing in the distance. But my brain wouldn't let it go. It kept spinning the moment in the park over and over. Charlie's growl, the stillness, that void in the trees that somehow looked too solid to be air. The next morning, I checked the window. Nothing. No marks, no prints, no sign that anything had been there. Charlie had finally dozed off on the floor near the front door. But even in sleep, his ears twitched with every sound outside. I told myself we were done with that park. There were other places we could go. The city trail looped through some nice neighborhoods, and there was a proper dog park 15 minutes away, fenced, maintained, and full of normal people who said hi and threw tennis balls. But the next time I ran into that woman, the one who told me about the hidden park, she asked why I hadn't been around. It caught me off guard. We were standing by the milk fridges in the store, and she looked at me like I'd missed an appointment or broken some unspoken rule. "You're golden," she said, like I might have forgotten I had a dog. He was starting to really settle in with the others. That wording stuck with me. Not making friends or getting used to it, settling in. I shrugged and mumbled something about work, but she kept smiling, tight-lipped and still, the way someone might smile at a child who's lying about stealing a cookie. When I left the store, I walked around the back to see the park from a distance. I didn't plan on going in. I just wanted to look. And that's when I saw the men at the fence, 2 of them, just standing there at the edge of the woods, beyond where the clearing stopped. They weren't doing anything, not talking, not moving, just standing shoulder to shoulder, maybe 10 feet apart, both facing the park. I stared at them for what felt like 5 full minutes, waiting for one of them to adjust a sleeve or scratch their arm or shift their weight. Anything. But they didn't. And when I finally looked away, to glance down at my phone just for a second, and looked back up, they were gone. No sound, no branches cracking, just empty space where 2 figures had been seconds before. That was the moment I realized I wasn't dealing with something odd. I was dealing with something deliberate, and I had already been noticed. The next few days were quiet. I kept to myself. Walked Charlie in crowded parks, kept the TV on even when I wasn't watching it, and avoided the area behind the grocery store like it was toxic. Part of me felt ridiculous, like I was letting a patch of woods and a few weird locals get under my skin. But the other part, the part that heard the scratching and saw those still figures at the tree line, that part knew I'd already gone too far. Then the package arrived. No return address, just my name and apartment number written in blocky, uneven letters on the front. It was a padded envelope, already half open when I found it wedged between the rest of my mail. I thought it might be a mistake at first, something meant for someone else. But my name was there, clear as day. Inside was a small notebook, old, weathered, smelled like mildew and something metallic. The first page was blank. The second had a name scribbled in black ink, Rachel M. And the pages after that, they were journal entries, mostly short, a few lines here and there, dated from 5 years ago. Saw the same woman at the park today. She smiled again. Why don't they ever say anything? Charlie's acting strange again, not eating. Just stares at the closet door all night. I saw it today, in the trees. It didn't move right, like it wasn't made for this place. I told the landlord, he told me not to talk about it. That entry made my skin go cold. Because my landlord had done the same thing. The week before, I'd offhandedly mentioned to him that something about the wooded area behind the fence creeped me out. I was half joking, fishing for a, yeah, it's weird back there kind of conversation. But instead, he shut down completely. Told me flat out, just stay out of that lot. People keep to themselves. Don't ask questions. Back to the journal. Rachel's entries got shorter, more frantic, pages missing, scribbles in the margins. She mentioned someone knocking at her door at 2:11 a.m., multiple nights in a row. She never answered. The last entry was just one line. I think they need the dogs first. That night I slept on the couch with Charlie curled up beside me, his ears twitching at every sound outside. At 2:11 a.m. Exactly, I heard footsteps on the stairs outside my apartment. Then silence. No knock. No voices. Just one long creak of the top stair, and nothing after that. Charlie didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just looked at the door and let out the lowest whimper I've ever heard. I didn't sleep that night. I lay still on the couch with the lights off and the TV muted. Charlie pressed against my side like he knew something I didn't. Every few minutes I'd glance toward the front door, expecting the handle to jiggle or the mail slot to creak. Nothing came. Just silence and the occasional groan of the old radiator. In the morning, I checked the hallway. It was empty. No footprints, no marks. But there was a slip of paper tucked into the door frame. Just a single word, written in the same shaky, ink-heavy handwriting from the journal. Soon, I called the police that afternoon. Told them about the footsteps, the note, the strange men in the trees. They sent someone out, a young officer who looked barely old enough to shave. He was polite, but distracted. Said they'd keep an eye out and recommended I get a security cam if I was feeling uneasy. I didn't mention the journal. I didn't mention the dog park. Because I knew that tone. I've used it myself. That we're humoring you tone. I installed 2 cameras the next day. One at the front door, one pointed out the living room window that overlooked the street. Nothing happened for the next week. No notes, no scratching. Just normal. Then the woman from the grocery store went missing. I only found out because her face popped up on a flyer near the gas station. Black and white photo. Glasses, tight smile. Last seen walking her dog near the back lot behind the store. A week after that, a local news site posted a 2-paragraph story about ongoing animal disappearances in the area. Dogs mostly, a few cats, always near wooded edges, late evening. No signs of struggle, no leads. That same night, Charlie sat up around 2 a.m. and stared at the window. He didn't growl. He didn't move, just watched. For 20 minutes. I never looked outside. I didn't want to know. 2 days later, I packed up everything I owned and moved halfway across the state. Found a small place in a louder neighborhood, apartment complex with too many kids and too little privacy. Perfect. I still have the journal. I keep it in a Ziploc bag at the back of my closet. Sometimes I take it out and flip through it, even though I've read every word more times than I want to admit. I still don't know what Rachel saw out there, but I think whatever it is, it waits. It waits for someone new, someone who doesn't know the unspoken rules, someone who lets their guard down and lets their dog run too close to the trees. And I think Charlie knew, even before I did. I think the dogs always know. A couple years ago, I did one of those month-long house swaps with a friend of a friend. She lived on the coast, I lived inland, and we were both trying to shake things up after some life stuff. Mine being a breakup, hers being a layoff. It was casual, not through any official site. Just a couple email exchanges, a shared doc with basic info, and keys sent through the mail. The house I stayed in was a 2-story craftsman-style place tucked up against the woods in northern Oregon. Quiet, wood-paneled everything, big wraparound porch. I could hear the ocean if I opened a window at night. Honestly, it was kind of perfect. There was even a fireplace with split logs already stacked beside it. The only thing she asked was that I not go into the guest room. She wasn't weird about it. Just said something like, "I keep a bunch of my mom's stuff in there. She passed a while ago and I haven't had the bandwidth to go through it yet." Totally fair. Everyone's got a room like that. So I didn't think much of it. I stayed in the master, worked remotely on my laptop from the little breakfast nook that caught the morning light, took walks along the cliffs, read books. It was calm. So much calmer than I'd been in months. But by the end of the first week, the energy in the house started to shift. I don't even know how to explain it without sounding paranoid. It wasn't like creaking walls or slamming doors. It was more like presence. The kind of thing you feel before you turn around and see someone staring at you. The kind of stillness that only makes sense if it's being watched. I'd catch myself holding my breath when I walked past that door at the end of the hallway. It was always closed, always locked. I never tried to open it. I didn't want to. Not because of what might be inside, but because of how heavy that side of the hallway felt. Like the air just pressed down harder over there. Charlie, the dog I brought with me, refused to go near it. He'd pause at the corner, sniff the air once, and then back away like it smelled wrong. I started noticing little things too. My phone would randomly stop charging in that part of the hallway. The air vent near the guest room was always cold, even when the heat was on. One night, the ceiling light outside the door flickered for a full minute before blowing out completely. But still, I kept telling myself it was an old house. Old houses make noise. Old houses breathe. Until the night I heard someone walking around in that room. I woke up around 3:17 a.m. I remember because my phone was face down on the nightstand, and when I flipped it over, the screen glared way too bright in the dark. No messages, no notifications, just that ugly timestamp staring back at me like it had caught me doing something wrong. At first, I didn't know why I'd woken up. The house was dead quiet. No cars outside, no wind, just that stillness that's somehow louder than noise. I laid there, eyes wide, trying to fall back asleep. That's when I heard it. A soft thump. Then another. It was deliberate, like someone taking slow, cautious steps on hardwood. Not heavy, not dragging, just pacing. The kind of slow pacing someone does when they're thinking or waiting. It was coming from the guest room. I didn't move. I just stared at the ceiling, heart hammering. You know that thing your brain does where it tries to rationalize before it lets you panic? I went through every excuse I could. Maybe the old wood was shifting. Maybe there was a squirrel in the attic. Maybe I was still half dreaming. But then the pacing stopped. Dead center. And I heard a quiet creak, like weight shifting on the other side of the wall. Like whoever was in there had stopped moving to listen. I sat up and waited. Nothing. Just silence again. But not empty silence. It felt thick, like there was something still in the air, holding its breath along with me. The next morning, I tried to tell myself it hadn't happened. I even made coffee and took it out to the porch like nothing was off, like the ocean air could just erase the memory. Charlie stayed curled up by the fireplace and didn't budge, which was weird for him. Normally, he'd be nosing around by now, chasing dust motes and looking for breakfast scraps. Around noon, I went down the hallway again. The guest room door looked completely normal. Same old brass knob. Same worn scuff on the baseboard. But the second I passed it, I felt that drop in temperature again. Not dramatic, just enough to raise the hairs on my arms. I did something dumb then. I knocked. Just once. Software. I don't even know why I did it. Maybe to prove to myself there was nothing there. Maybe to break the tension in my own chest. Either way, I knocked, stood there for 3 seconds, then laughed under my breath and turned to go back to the kitchen. As I took my first step away, I heard something behind the door. A voice. Not clear, not loud, just a low whisper. But I swear to you, it said my name. I didn't tell anyone. Not that day, not the next. I kept thinking that saying it out loud would make it feel more real. Like if I acknowledged it, I'd have to admit something was wrong. Not just with the house, but with me. So instead, I busied myself. I took Charlie for longer walks. I cooked actual meals. I reorganized the bookshelf in the living room twice. Anything to keep me out of that hallway. But that door, it was in my peripheral every time I walked by. Even when I forced myself not to look, I felt it, like a camera trained on me that I couldn't see. One afternoon, I found myself digging through the built-in cabinets in the hallway. Not snooping, really, just bored and trying to stay out of my own head. Most of it was normal house stuff. Light bulbs, extra batteries, a couple candles. But at the very back of one cabinet, there was a shoebox. Inside were photos. Old ones, black and white, a little warped around the edges from humidity. They were mostly of the house, before the remodel from what I could tell. The wallpaper was different, the furniture mismatched and faded. One photo showed the front porch with overgrown ivy climbing up the beams. Another showed the guest room door, slightly ajar. I paused on that one. It looked almost identical to how it was now. Except in the photo, there was something strange. The wallpaper near the door was darker. Not stained, not damaged, just darker. Like a shadow had taken up permanent residence there. The more I stared at it, the more I realized the door wasn't just ajar. It was open just wide enough for a sliver of something to be visible inside the room. something that didn't look like furniture, just a tall, narrow silhouette. I flipped to the back of the photo, written in faded ink, "Guest room, October 1971. Don't show mom." I don't know why that made my stomach flip, but it did. Something about that note, the casualness of it, paired with the image, made the whole thing feel heavier. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I could hear it again. Not the pacing. Breathing. Soft. Steady. Muffled. Like someone was asleep on the other side of the wall. I turned toward the sound and stared at the drywall separating me from the guest room. It didn't feel like a wall anymore. It felt thin. Fragile. Charlie let out a low whine from his spot near the door. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking directly at the wall. And when I whispered his name, he didn't move. The next morning, I packed up the photos and shoved them back into the box. I didn't throw them away. I thought about it, but it felt like crossing some weird line. Like destroying them would make whatever was going on even more interested in me. That sounds insane. I know that. But I'd lived with this thing long enough now to know when logic didn't apply. After breakfast, I emailed the woman who owned the house. Just a short message to check in. "Hey, hope things are going well on your end. Quick question. Anything I should know about the guest room?" I didn't expect a fast reply. She was traveling, last I heard, doing some kind of yoga retreat, or writing sabbatical or whatever. But part of me was hoping she'd say something. Even just a "don't worry, it's just creaky pipes." Instead, I heard from her sister. The email came through about 4 hours later. Subject line, RE:"guest room. This is Hannah, Alex's sister." It started polite enough. She introduced herself, said she was monitoring her sister's email while she was offline, and asked if everything was okay. Then she wrote, "Has the door opened on its own? Are you hearing anything at night? I'm sorry. I told her she shouldn't keep renting that place out." My chest locked up reading that. Not because it confirmed anything supernatural, but because it didn't sound shocked. It didn't sound like she thought I was crazy. It sounded like she knew. I wrote back. Told her what I'd heard. That I hadn't opened the door. That I didn't want to open it. That I wasn't even sure I wanted to stay another week. She replied 30 minutes later, "Just don't open the door. It needs the room to stay closed. That's the only thing that keeps it quiet." We learned that the hard way. There was no follow-up after that. No explanation of what it was. No family backstory, no haunted lore. No comforting disclaimer that it was probably just stress. Just instructions. Don't open the door. That night, I moved the dresser in the hallway in front of the guest room. It wasn't heavy, but it was awkward. I shoved it across the floor, ignoring the way the legs screeched against the wood. Charlie stayed out of the hallway completely. Just watched me from the kitchen like he knew I was touching something I shouldn't. I slept in the living room that night. Didn't even try the bedroom. And around 2:30 a.m., I heard the sound of the dresser dragging. Slow, steady. Something on the other side of that door was pushing. I didn't sleep after that. I sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket with all the lights on, heart pounding in a slow, steady rhythm that matched the sound of that dresser shifting, inch by inch, until it finally stopped. The silence that followed wasn't relief. It was waiting. I waited too. For the sun. For some reason to believe that daylight made me safe, even though by then I knew better. When it got bright enough outside to feel like the world was real again, I walked down the hall. The dresser had moved, just enough to make room for the door to open. It wasn't fully cleared, but the message was obvious. If whatever was behind that door wanted out, the furniture wasn't going to stop it. I pressed my ear against the door, even though every part of me screamed not to. No sound. No breathing. Just that same cold stillness. I backed away, went into the kitchen, made coffee without thinking. Charlie stayed curled up in a corner, his nose tucked into his tail like he was trying to disappear. Later that morning, I got another email from Hannah. It does this when it's not alone. When someone's in the house. You can keep it quiet, but only if it thinks you're leaving it alone. That's why we keep it locked. That's why we don't talk about it. I didn't reply. What was I supposed to say? Hey, thanks for the haunted rental. I went the whole day without stepping past the hallway. I closed the bedroom door and stayed in the living room again that night. TV on mute, blanket up to my chin, lights blazing. But this time, it didn't wait for the middle of the night. It started at 11:42 p.m. A soft knock, not frantic, not even particularly loud. Just 3 soft taps from the inside, then a pause, then my name, whispered, gentle, like a suggestion. You're tired. I froze. My heart pounded, but my body felt pinned, like I was made of wet concrete. You've been running. You don't have to anymore. The voice wasn't scary. That's what unnerved me most. It wasn't menacing or guttural or demonic. It was kind, familiar, like the part of you that tells you to take the day off, to answer the message, to say yes when you should say no. You could just rest. I closed my eyes and pulled the blanket tighter. The lights in the hallway flickered once, then went out completely. And from beneath the whisper, another sound. A gentle creak as the door latch clicked. Not open. Just unlocked. I didn't go check the door. I couldn't. I just sat there on the couch, every muscle locked into place, like my body knew better than my brain. Charlie was pressed up against me, shaking so subtly I almost missed it. He didn't make a sound. Not a bark, not a growl, just silence. And after a while, the voice stopped. No footsteps, no second knock. Just a return to that unnatural stillness, the kind that hums at the edge of hearing and makes you think you're about to hear something again, until you don't. I stayed up until sunrise. Then I packed. I didn't wait for the lease to end. I didn't email Hannah. I left the keys on the counter and I drove. 6 hours inland, no music, no stops, just me and Charlie, and the sound of the tires humming like white noise across the highway. A month later, I got a message from Alex, the actual owner of the house. She'd just returned from her retreat and wanted to thank me for keeping the place in one piece. Said she hoped I had a calm and restful time. I never replied. Sometimes I think about warning her, about writing back to say, hey, maybe don't let people sleep in the house with the thing behind the door. But I don't, because I think she already knows. And besides, I still don't understand what it was. Not really. Not even after everything. I don't know what it wants. Only that it waits. Not forever, just long enough. Long enough for you to get comfortable, to get lonely, to wonder what might be on the other side of the door. Long enough for your guard to drop just enough that it can offer you something it thinks you need. Rest, quiet, the end of whatever chaos you dragged into the house with you. And it's polite. That's the worst part. It doesn't break the door down. It waits for you to open it. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had. If I'd gotten up and walked toward it that night. Would I still be here? Would anyone know I was gone? Or would the room just be locked again the next morning, like it never opened at all? I moved twice since then. Charlie's getting older now, and he doesn't sleep near the door anymore. This happened about 5 years ago, and even now I don't talk about it much. Not because I'm scared it'll happen again, though yeah, maybe that's part of it. But because when I do tell people, I get that look. The kind people give you when they've decided you're either exaggerating or just a little off. Back then I was living in a town that was barely a town. One of those post-industrial, lost-in-time places off the main highway in upstate New York. It used to thrive when the rail lines were active. You could still see the bones of it if you knew where to look. Rusted-out factories. Boarded-up storefronts with faded for lease signs. A diner that somehow never closed. I'd moved there because rent was stupid cheap and I'd just started working remotely for a logistics company. I didn't need much, just Wi-Fi and a half-decent grocery store. The apartment I found was above a bait shop, no joke. Smelled like plastic worms and mildew in the stairwell, but the unit itself was fine. There was this shortcut I used to take almost daily, a footpath that cut behind the old rail depot and across the train tracks. It knocked 15 minutes off my walk to the store, and after a while, it just became part of my routine. I didn't even think about it until I started seeing him. It wasn't dramatic at first. The first few times I barely noticed. Just a figure ahead of me or behind me. Not close, not threatening. Always walking the tracks, never speaking. I'd assumed it was another local who knew the shortcut. Maybe someone else who liked the quiet. It was rural enough that seeing a person at all felt rare. But he was always there. Always the same pace, the same dark clothes. Hood up, head down, no dog, no bag, no sound, and always at the same time. I started timing my walks differently, going out earlier or later, taking longer routes through the neighborhoods. But no matter how I changed it, if I took the shortcut near dusk, he'd be there. And I swear, I started to recognize the way he moved. Too smooth, too steady. Like someone playing a loop of a walk cycle on an old film reel. One day I stopped walking the tracks completely, took the longer route for almost a month. The anxiety faded a bit. I convinced myself it was nothing, just a lonely town and an overactive imagination. But then I found a boot print behind my building, right by the stairwell, pressed into the dirt, facing the back door. It was pointing toward my apartment. At first, I tried to laugh it off, told myself it could have been anyone. The bait shop downstairs had customers, mostly fishermen and locals with nothing better to do. And the print wasn't exactly clear. Could have been a work boot. Could have been someone passing through. But I checked the stairwell camera anyway. The bait shop had installed it after some kid tried to shoplift half their tackle wall the previous summer. I didn't even think the feed worked. But I asked the owner, Tom, if I could take a look. He waved me back behind the counter into a cluttered little office that smelled like coffee grounds and motor oil. The feed was grainy and jittery, but it recorded in 12-hour loops. Tom scrolled through the previous night's footage. Nothing out of the ordinary until around 2:11 a.m. That's when he paused it. There was a shape. Not facing the camera, not climbing the stairs, just standing at the bottom. Still. Not moving. Tom squinted. "You expecting company?" I didn't answer, because I recognized the outline. The same hunched shoulders, the hood up, hands in pockets. No backpack. No reason to be there. And then on the screen, the figure tilted its head. Just slightly. And the feed glitched. When it came back, the stairwell was empty. I told Tom it was probably just a drunk. Maybe someone who got turned around. But that night, I didn't sleep. Because the more I thought about it, the more I realized I had never seen the man on the tracks step off of them. Not once. He never crossed the grass, never turned onto the walking trail, never veered left or right. He just walked. A perfect line. Same speed, same posture. And yet somehow, he'd ended up behind my building. The next day, I walked the long route to the store again. I kept my hood up and headphones in, trying to act normal. But when I passed the edge of the train yard, I turned just for a second. And he was there, standing in the middle of the tracks, exactly where I would have cut through, still as a fence post, facing me. The sun was setting behind him, and the light made it hard to see his face. But even from a distance, I knew he was watching me. I kept walking, faster, didn't look back again. But that night when I took Charlie, the old lab I was fostering at the time, out for a late pee behind the building, he froze at the top of the stairs, hackles up. I waited, let him sniff the air. And then he turned and walked back inside, refused to go out again. I stopped using the shortcut entirely after that, not just avoiding it, refusing it. I'd rather add 20 minutes to every errand than walk past that stretch again. There was something about that part of town, that crossing, that hollowed-out train yard, that just didn't sit right anymore. But the weird thing was, the less I walked the tracks, the more I saw him. On my way to the gas station 2 blocks over, I'd glance down an alley and see the back of a figure already halfway gone. Grocery store parking lot? There'd be someone across the street, standing too still, too long. Always the same build, same hoodie, same silence. Sometimes I'd blink and they'd be gone. Other times I wouldn't even look directly. Just felt it, like a pressure in the air behind you that never quite goes away. I didn't talk about it with anyone. It's the kind of thing you can't talk about unless you want to hear your own voice wobble while you try to make it sound logical. And Charlie, bless him, never left my side. If I went to the bathroom, he waited outside the door. If I sat at the kitchen table to work, he lay directly under my chair. I used to think he was clingy. Now I think he was guarding me. One night, maybe a week after the last stairwell incident, I woke up with the worst sense of vertigo I've ever had. Like the entire room had tilted 5 degrees left. I sat up in bed, dizzy and disoriented. And that's when I heard the whistle. Not a train whistle. Not exactly. It was softer, lower. Like someone blowing air through cupped hands. It came in 2 notes. Short, pause, longer. It repeated, again and again. I don't know how I knew, but I knew it was calling me. I got out of bed and walked toward the window, careful not to let my feet creak too loud on the boards. Charlie stayed in bed, eyes wide open, watching me. I peeled back the curtain. Down the street, just past the bend where the sidewalk disappears behind the row of dead trees. Someone was standing in the middle of the road, hood up, hands in pockets. And when I squinted hard enough through the darkness and porch light spill, I saw something new. His feet weren't touching the ground, not by much. An inch, maybe 2. But he hovered. just enough that the shadows didn't line up right, just enough that my brain stuttered for a second, trying to register what it was seeing. Then he turned, slow, like the second hand on a clock, and stepped out of view. Not walked. Shifted. And the whistle stopped. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat on the couch with Charlie, half watching some late-night cooking show on mute, the volume turned down just enough to let me hear if anything moved outside. I kept thinking about the way the figure hovered, that small, unnatural detail. That was what made it real. Not the creepiness, but the physics. That sense that the world was trying to process something it wasn't built to explain. The next morning, I walked 2 blocks to the town library. It was mostly empty. A single-story building that still had a card catalog and smelled like old upholstery. There was a woman at the front desk, mid-60s maybe, with sharp eyes and a coffee mug that said, "Retired but still right." I asked her a question I didn't know how to phrase. "Did anything ever happen down by the old rail yard?" She didn't blink, just looked at me over the rim of her glasses. "You mean like the fire? Or the missing kids?" She said it so plainly, like she was reading headlines from a file folder. I asked her to explain, and she led me to a box of archived clippings stacked under the local history display. The box was dusty, full of brittle copies of newspapers I'd never heard of. I flipped through slowly, careful not to smudge anything. 3 articles stood out. A 1963 train derailment that killed 7, mostly rail workers, and a local boy who had apparently wandered onto the tracks. A string of missing persons between 1978 and 1985, all teenagers, all last seen near the East Side tracks. A blurb from the early 2000s about the last freight line closing due to track degradation and public safety concerns. There were no conclusions, just events that seemed to stack on top of each other, with long silences in between. "You're not the first to ask," the librarian said, like she could read my mind. "But no one ever sticks around long enough to care." I left with shaking hands, not out of fear exactly, more like my brain was trying to knit 2 versions of reality together. One where this town was just quiet and sad and half forgotten, and another where something beneath it never forgot you. That night I didn't wait for the whistle. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the back door, where the steps led down into the alley behind the bait shop. The light outside the door flickered just once, then came back on. And then I heard it, footsteps, on gravel, slow, crunching, deliberate. They stopped right outside. I stood, took 2 steps toward the door, and Charlie barked. Loud, sharp, right at the base of the door like he could see through it. And from the other side, something knocked. Not with a fist, with something hard, like a piece of metal tapping once lightly on wood. I didn't open the door. I don't know if I've ever stood so still in my life. Charlie had planted himself right at my feet, ears back, the deep, steady growl in his chest vibrating through the floor. I kept one hand on his collar not to hold him back, but so I wouldn't lose my grip on something solid. The knock didn't come again, just the one, deliberate, like it was never about getting inside, just reminding me it could. I don't remember going back to bed. I think I might have just sat there till sunrise, heart wedged in my throat. But sometime after dawn, I looked at the floor by the door and saw it. Something I hadn't noticed in the dark. A thin line of soot. Black, powdery, dragged in a half circle on the floor like something had traced the outside edge of the door with an old train brake or coal dust. I wiped it up with a rag and threw it away without thinking. That same morning, I emailed my boss and asked for time off. I didn't give a reason, Just said I had something personal to deal with and needed a few days. I didn't wait for the response. I just packed a bag, loaded Charlie into the car, and drove 2 hours to stay with an old college friend who lived near Syracuse. I didn't say much to him either, just that I needed a break and that Charlie wasn't doing well with the cold. That much was technically true. My friend was the kind of person who didn't ask a lot of questions, and I was grateful for it. But even 2 towns over, I still didn't sleep well. Every night around 2 a.m., I'd wake up to silence so thick it pressed against the windows. Not a car, not a breeze, just stillness. On the 3rd night, it changed. I heard the whistle again. 2 notes, soft, familiar. Not close, but not far enough either. Charlie started pacing, walking the apartment like he was circling something I couldn't see. He didn't growl. He didn't bark. He just walked, steady, focused, ears trained on the front door. That's when I understood. It wasn't just the tracks. It wasn't just the town. It was me. Whatever this thing was, it had noticed me the moment I saw it. Or maybe even before that. Maybe the shortcut was never the start. Maybe the walk through the tracks was just where I finally stepped into its path. I started to feel like a mark had been made. A signal passed between whatever rules governed that stretch of rail and whatever used it to find people. And once it knows you, it doesn't stop walking. It just follows. Tracks don't lead somewhere, they connect things. I didn't go back to that town. I didn't pack up the apartment or clean out the fridge or cancel my lease in person. I called the landlord from a coffee shop an hour away and told him to keep my deposit. Told him to toss whatever was left. I didn't care. It wasn't worth what I knew I'd be walking back into. He didn't argue, just said, "You're not the first," and hung up. That was the last thing anyone from that town ever said to me. I spent a while living out of my car, crashed with friends who didn't ask questions, moved cities, found new routes, never took shortcuts. If I ever came across anything that looked like a rail crossing or even sounded like a whistle in the distance, I turned around. It faded slowly. No more footsteps, no more whistles. Charlie eventually started sleeping through the night again. His tail stopped staying tucked. I stopped keeping the lights on after 2 a.m. For a while, I let myself believe I was free. But last week, something happened. I was visiting a friend out in Colorado, hiking one of those rail-to-trail paths that used to be part of an old freight line. It was daylight, warm. People were out with strollers and bikes, harmless. And then, as I passed under an old trestle bridge, I saw it. On the far side of the tracks, just before the trees, a man, hood up, hands in pockets. Motionless. He wasn't walking. Not yet. He was just waiting. And in that moment, I felt it all again. The stillness, the too silent world, the way the air gets wrong. Like something old is paying attention. I didn't scream, didn't run. I just turned around and walked the long way back, heartbeat tucked under my tongue. I haven't heard the whistle again, but I know what it means now. It's not calling to you. It's warning everything else, because the man on the tracks doesn't need to chase you. He walks. And if you've seen him, if you've really seen him, he already knows the way. It might take days, weeks, years, but at some point, when your guard's back down and your life starts to feel normal again, you'll hear it. 2 notes, software, faint, like the wind blowing through steel. And then you'll remember what I'm telling you now. He never changes pace. He never changes course. And he never stops walking. want to preface this by saying I've always been an animal person. Grew up with cats, dogs, 2 birds, and a guinea pig named Tater Tot who lived way longer than any guinea pig reasonably should. I've fostered before, volunteered at shelters, even did a summer internship at a wildlife rehab center. I know how to handle weird behaviors and quirky personalities. I don't scare easily. So when I say this was the worst pet I've ever had, I don't mean he chewed up a couch or peed in my shoes. I mean something was wrong with this animal in a way I still don't fully understand. It started, like most bad decisions do, on Craigslist. I was living in a small, swampy town in South Florida at the time, early 30s, renting a house that backed up to mangroves, working from home and going through a stretch of loneliness that came out of nowhere. I had just ended a 4-year relationship and was doing that dumb thing where you try to fix the silence by filling your life with projects and distractions. I'd recently taken up baking, joined a community softball team I never actually played for, and was now evidently browsing the pets section of Craigslist at 2 a.m. with a whiskey buzz and too much optimism. The listing was short, no photos, just free to good home. Quiet, doesn't need much, just don't cage it, not a dog or cat. No contact name, just a phone number. I should have moved on. I knew that. It read like either a scam or someone trying to offload a literal wild animal. But something about the wording caught me. That line, just don't cage it. It felt strange. Not in a red flag way. More like a dare. I texted the number, half expecting it to bounce, but they replied within minutes. You free tomorrow evening? The next day, I drove 30 minutes to a part of town where the houses were spaced far apart, dirt roads only semi-paved, Spanish moss hanging from every branch like the trees were slouched in exhaustion. The property was tucked behind a rusted metal gate that didn't lock. No house number, just a mailbox with peeling stickers and a cracked frog statue beside it. The person who met me was a woman in her 60s, maybe older, wore a faded tank top and no shoes. She didn't say hello, just pointed toward the porch and said, "It's already in the box." There was a wooden crate, nailed mostly shut except for a small hole drilled into the top. No sound, no movement. "Don't let it sit in the sun," she said, "and don't try to lock it up." I asked what it was. She looked at me flat and tired. "It's just best if it stays with someone new now." Then she turned and walked inside. I stood there on the porch for a full minute after the door shut behind her. I knocked once, half-hearted, out of politeness, but she didn't come back. No good luck, no thanks for stopping by, just silence and the faint creak of the porch boards under my shoes. The crate was maybe 2 feet wide and 1.5 feet tall. Handmade, looked old. The wood was warped in places, but it was still sturdy. The only openings were 3 small drilled holes near the top, just enough for air to pass through. I squatted down, pressed my ear close. Nothing. No scratching, no rustling, no breathing. I should have left it there, honestly. I should have walked back to my car, texted a fake apology about forgetting I was allergic to whatever it was, and noped out. But something about the whole thing hooked me. That quiet kind of weird that doesn't make you run. It makes you curious. And curiosity, especially mine, has always had a way of making bad decisions sound reasonable. I loaded the crate into my back seat and drove home, checking my rearview mirror every few minutes like I was expecting it to lurch or shift. It never did. When I got home, I set it down in the living room and unscrewed the top. Slowly, gently, a voice in the back of my head whispered, "Don't." But it wasn't loud enough. The lid came off easy, and for a few seconds, I just stared. There wasn't a snake inside, or a raccoon, or any kind of animal I'd ever seen. What sat at the bottom of the crate was... Honestly, I still don't know how to describe it in a way that doesn't sound made up. It looked like a possum at first glance. Grayish fur, small black eyes, body low to the ground. But its limbs were too long. Not unnaturally so, just a little off. The joints bent weird. It didn't blink. Didn't flinch. Just looked up at me. Totally still. Like it was waiting for me to figure something out. I didn't touch it. I didn't have to. Because about 3 seconds after I opened the box, it climbed out on its own. No panic. No aggression. Just this silent, calculated movement. Like it had been here before. Like it already knew the layout of the room. It walked to the far corner of the living room, curled up beside the bookshelf, and closed its eyes. And that's where it stayed. For hours, just sitting, watching, breathing. At some point, I started calling it Benny. No idea why. The name just popped into my head and stuck. For the first few days, that's all it did. No noise. No mess. It didn't eat. It didn't sleep near me. It didn't even try to leave the house. It just watched. Always facing the room. Always silent. And always awake. By the 4th day, I had stopped pretending that Benny was a normal animal. I tried to rationalize it. Told myself maybe he was some rare exotic pet the old woman hadn't known how to care for. A marsupial or nocturnal species that didn't behave like a typical house pet. But the more I tried to justify things, the more uncomfortable the explanations became. Because Benny started learning the house, not like a dog learning commands, more like a roommate developing habits. He started appearing in different rooms throughout the day, always quiet, always aware of me. I never actually saw him move, not once. I'd just walk into the kitchen, and he'd already be there, sitting against the baseboard, watching the door before I opened it. No sounds, no sudden movements. He never touched anything, never got into the trash or scratched furniture. But he was always present. One morning I woke up to find him in the hallway, sitting outside the bathroom like he'd been waiting. I hadn't realized how much that hallway creaked until that moment. The boards felt louder under my feet, like I was trespassing into his space, not the other way around. Charlie, the neighbor's dog who used to bark at squirrels and chase lizards across our shared fence, stopped coming over. He'd sniff toward the back door, then whine and retreat. I tried coaxing him in with treats. Nothing worked. I don't blame him. I think animals know. About 2 weeks in, I noticed something else. Benny never blinked. Not once. His eyes weren't glazed over or unresponsive. They were alert. Too alert. Like every part of him was wired to notice. I tried testing it once. Waved my hand suddenly, clapped near his face, dropped a spoon behind him. He never flinched, never turned. But his eyes? They tracked. Subtle shifts, pinpoint locked. He was always watching. I thought maybe I'd made a mistake, that I should call someone, a vet, animal control, maybe even the cops. But what would I say? Hi, I took a weird Craigslist pet home and now it's haunting my house by sitting completely still? That's not the kind of thing you can explain without sounding unstable. Still, something had to give. I needed to know what I was living with. So one night, I set up an old baby monitor I found in the closet. The kind with the little screen and the night vision mode. I put the camera on a bookshelf across from where Benny liked to sit and left the monitor next to my bed. At 2:47 a.m., I woke up to the screen flashing. Benny wasn't on camera. The chair was empty. The room was dark. And then, a sound. 3 soft taps, Not on the monitor, not on the window. On my bedroom door. I didn't open the door. I don't know if that was the right choice. I just lay there, heartbeat loud enough to drown out the whir of the monitor, staring at the ceiling in the dark while Charlie, the little motion detector light on the baby monitor, flashed like a metronome with no rhythm. The 3 taps didn't come again. No scratching, no pacing, just silence. Eventually I dozed off. I don't remember falling asleep, but I woke up stiff, like I'd been bracing for something all night. Morning light spilled through the curtains. Everything looked normal, quiet, still. The door was cracked open. Just an inch. I know I hadn't left it that way. And I know I hadn't gotten up to move it. The monitor was still on, still humming, but the screen was blank. Just a frozen frame of an empty chair and an unreadable timestamp. When I stepped into the hallway, Benny was there. Exactly where he'd been before. Same spot, same posture. Like the night had never happened. But something had changed. I felt it before I could put words to it. His head turned only slightly, just enough that it broke the illusion of stillness. It was the first time I'd seen him move on purpose, and it sent something cold down my back. I didn't go near him. I went straight to the kitchen, poured myself coffee with a shaking hand, and stared out the window for a long time. The trees beyond the fence didn't sway. No birds, no wind. Even the insects had gone quiet. It felt like the house had slipped into a bubble that nothing could enter or escape from. That afternoon, I finally texted the woman who gave him to me. I didn't even know what to say. I stared at the blank message screen for 5 minutes before typing, "What is Benny?" The message delivered, but no reply came. I tried calling, straight to voicemail. I don't know what I was hoping for. A manual? A warning? Even a LOL, he's weird but harmless, would have done something. But there was nothing. That night, I didn't set up the monitor. I locked my door, pulled the dresser in front of it, and left the hallway light on. Charlie paced for almost an hour before finally curling up under the bed. Not his usual spot. Not even close. I think he was hiding more than resting. At 3:04 a.m., I woke up again. Not from a noise this time. From a feeling. The kind you get when someone's standing behind you. I looked toward the door. The crack of hallway light beneath it had disappeared. Blocked. And from the other side, I heard something low and deliberate. A whisper. Software measured. "Let me in." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I stared at the door like it had grown teeth, and I waited for it to rattle, to creak open slowly, horror movie style. But nothing came, just the whisper. "Let me in." Software gentle. It wasn't demanding. It was patient. Like whoever or whatever was behind that door wasn't in a rush. Like it had all the time in the world. I stayed frozen until dawn. My legs went numb. My mouth was dry. The hallway light crept back under the door like a tide rolling in after a long, still night. When I finally pushed the dresser aside and opened the door, the hallway was empty. Benny wasn't in the corner. Not on the bookshelf. Not in the kitchen. I checked every room, every closet, even the space beneath the porch steps. Nothing. For the first time since I'd brought him home, the house felt empty. And I should have felt relief, but instead, it felt worse. That afternoon, I drove back to the house where I picked him up. The metal gate was open. The frog statue was gone. The mailbox hung crooked on a bent nail. The house looked abandoned. Windows fogged over. A stack of yellowed flyers stuck in the screen door. I knocked anyway. No answer. I shouted Benny's name like an idiot, like calling him would undo whatever this was. Then I walked around to the back. The backyard was overgrown, but there were signs of life. Footprints in the dirt. Not shoes, bare feet. Small, dozens of them, trailing from the porch to the tree line and back again, like someone or something had been pacing, repeating the same path over and over, barefoot, in silence. That's when I saw it. The crate. The same wooden crate I'd taken Benny home in, sitting under the back porch, weather-warped and half-covered in moss. Except this one wasn't empty. There were scratch marks on the inside, deep ones, and feathers. Dozens of them. Black, oily, stuck in the corners like whatever had been in there had tried to crawl its way out, and failed. I didn't touch it. I just backed away and left. That night I went home and locked every door and window. I slept with a hammer next to my bed. I told myself it was probably over, that Benny had just left, wandered off, found a new house to haunt. I didn't hear anything that night. But the next morning when I walked into the kitchen, I found something waiting for me. On the counter, a single feather, black, damp, still warm to the touch. And beneath it, scratched lightly into the laminate surface, 4 crooked words. I'm still your pet. I left the house for good that morning. Didn't pack, didn't clean, didn't even grab my laptop or my charger. I picked up Charlie, drove 3 towns over, and checked into a pet-friendly roadside motel with flickering neon and a sink that dripped every 6 seconds. It felt like the safest place in the world. The woman at the front desk asked if we were passing through. I nodded. I was lying. I stayed there 3 nights. The first 2 were quiet. The third wasn't. At 3:12 a.m., I heard it again. That whisper from inside the room. Only this time it didn't say, "Let me in." It said, "I found you." I turned on every light, opened every drawer, every closet, pulled back the shower curtain, checked under the bed, even popped the battery off the smoke detector just to feel like I was in control. Nothing. Benny wasn't there. But Charlie was cowering in the corner, shaking so hard his collar clinked against the tile. That's when I realized it wasn't about the house. It never was. It was me. Something about taking Benny in. That quiet, gentle creature who never barked, never ate, never blinked. It had marked me, and not in some haunted object way, in a choice way. Like the moment I opened that crate and said the name out loud, I'd agreed to something I didn't understand. I thought about the woman, the bare feet in the backyard, the crate under the porch. She hadn't given Benny away. She'd passed him on. The next day I left town, again, rented a cabin deep in the mountains under a fake name, prepaid for 6 months, told no one where I went, changed phones, cut off social, shut down everything. I started to believe maybe distance could shake it loose, that Benny might not follow this far. And for a while it worked. 3 months passed. No whispers, no feathers. Charlie got his energy back. I hiked, cooked, read, wrote. I let myself breathe again. Until last week, when I came back from a morning hike, there was something waiting for me on the front step. A wooden crate, same dimensions, same hand-drilled holes. No note, no scratches, just silence inside. I didn't open it, I didn't touch it. I stood there for a full hour, staring at it, listening for breath, or movement, or whisper. Then I turned and walked inside, locked the door, and sat down at the kitchen table. And now I wait, because I think I understand the rules. You don't keep Benny. You just hold on to him long enough for him to choose someone else. And when he does, you leave the crate where they'll find it, and you don't look back. This was supposed to be the easiest side gig I'd ever taken. A friend of a friend, Monica, needed someone to house sit for 2 weeks while she went to Portugal with her partner. She was some kind of travel blogger, big on Instagram, and apparently got free trips all the time. Her usual sitter flaked last minute, and I was just between projects, working remotely, broke as hell, and said yes before asking many questions. It wasn't even in a bad area. The house was in this affluent, leafy suburb about 20 minutes outside the city. Big yards, quiet streets, every mailbox the same slate gray rectangle. Monica's house was a renovated 70s split level tucked at the end of a cul-de-sac with climbing ivy on one side and a massive oak tree out front that shaded the driveway like an umbrella. It looked like the kind of place that smelled like eucalyptus candles and always had a full fruit bowl. She gave me the rundown on a Zoom call. Nothing complicated. Just water the plants every 3 days, feed the cat if she comes inside, but she mostly lives outside. Oh, and don't go into the basement. The latch sticks and it's a pain to get back open. Everything you need is upstairs anyway. That last part stuck with me, not in a red flag way, more like an odd postscript in an otherwise boring list of instructions. But I nodded, smiled, agreed, and picked up the keys the day before she left. The first few days were fine. The place was spotless. Hardwood floors, high ceilings, built-in shelves full of hardcover books no one reads. There was a small study with a desk where I set up my laptop, and a guest bedroom with a bed nicer than anything I'd ever owned. The kitchen had a chalkboard with a little "Welcome, mi casa es su casa" note, and a bowl of fresh oranges underneath it that I never saw anyone refill. The cat, Hazel, didn't show up for 3 days. When she finally did, she slinked in through the back door like she owned the place, sniffed me once, and then curled up under the dining table as if she'd been waiting for me to leave. It wasn't until day 4 that I started to notice small things. Nothing big, just off. The TV remote would be on a different side of the coffee table than I left it. The front porch light would be on in the morning when I know I switched it off. A faint humming noise under the floorboards at night, just low enough that I thought it might be the refrigerator or plumbing or some old house thing I didn't understand. I still hadn't gone near the basement, but every time I passed that door, I got this faint, inexplicable feeling. Like it was listening. By the end of the first week, I'd developed a routine. Wake up, make coffee, check emails, water the ferns in the sunroom, toss some kibble into Hazel's bowl, even though she never touched it, and then try to convince myself I wasn't imagining things. It wasn't easy. That humming I mentioned, it wasn't constant. It would start sometime after midnight, soft and rhythmic, and fade just before dawn. Not a mechanical hum either, something stranger, like a distant tuning fork being held just behind the walls. The weird part was, I only ever heard it in the guest bedroom. If I tried walking around the house while it was happening, into the hallway or down to the kitchen, it vanished completely. But the second I stepped back into the bedroom, there it was again. Faint, but steady. Hazel hated that room. The first and only time she padded in there, she froze just inside the doorway, ears flat, tail low, body tensed like she was calculating the distance to flee if she had to. Then she hissed, unprovoked, and bolted down the hall like she'd seen something I couldn't. After that, she stayed out of sight most nights. I kept thinking about the basement. I told myself it was ridiculous to obsess over a door just because someone told me not to open it. but something about the way Monica had phrased it, the latch sticks, sounded rehearsed, like the kind of excuse you say too quickly. And once I noticed it, I couldn't stop noticing it. The door was thick, painted over in the same off-white as the rest of the trim, but just slightly different in texture. Newer, the kind of new that tries too hard to look old. And the handle was polished, clean, like it had been used recently. One night around 1 a.m., after too much wine and not enough sleep, I stood in front of it for a long time. I didn't open it, but I held my hand on the knob, and I swear I could feel something. A faint vibration, almost imperceptible, like the hum had a pulse. The moment I pulled my hand away, Hazel meowed from somewhere behind me. Loud, angry. I turned fast. She was sitting at the edge of the hallway, staring past me at the basement door. Her ears were pointed back, and her tail thumped once against the floor. Then she turned and left. I followed her to the kitchen, tried to distract myself by running the faucet, fiddling with the coffee pot, opening and closing cabinets I didn't need to open. That's when I saw it. Not on the counter, on the ceiling above the fridge. A thin, almost perfectly straight crack in the plaster. Black at the center, like something beneath the paint had shifted. The crack was easy to miss in daylight. You had to stand in the right corner of the kitchen, squint upward, and catch the faint line where the ceiling dipped ever so slightly above the fridge. But once I saw it, I couldn't stop seeing it. It wasn't just a cosmetic thing. It looked unnatural, like a seam, not chipped paint or swelling drywall. More like something was pushing from the inside, stretching the plaster until it gave a little. I told myself it was just an old house shifting on its foundation. Happens all the time. Florida homes breathe too, right? But that didn't explain the humming, or Hazel's behavior, or the light in the stairwell flickering on by itself at 3:08 a.m., 3 nights in a row. And it definitely didn't explain what I found in the study drawer. I wasn't snooping, not really. I was looking for a pen. I opened the top drawer of the desk where I'd set up my laptop, and inside was a manila folder, plain, unlabeled. Inside were photographs, old ones, all of the same room, the guest bedroom where I'd been sleeping. Same wallpaper, same window, same light fixture. But the bed was different, older, wood-framed. And in each photo, the bed was empty, except for one detail, a shape in the corner. Dark, blurred, sometimes near the dresser, sometimes closer to the closet door. Never clear. It wasn't until the 5th or 6th photo that I noticed it was always the same shape, always the same height, always facing the bed. And then I realized something worse. In one of the photos, the blur was closer to the wall than it should have been. Close enough that it cast a faint reflection in the mirror across from the bed. Only it didn't match. The shape in the mirror was taller, thinner, twisted, like the camera had caught 2 different things at once. I put the photos back, shoved the folder to the back of the drawer, slammed it shut, and didn't open it again. That night, I locked the guest bedroom and slept on the couch. Hazel curled up beside me. First time she'd done that since I arrived. And for a few hours, everything was still. Until around 2:50 a.m., when the humming returned. Stronger this time, vibrating faintly through the floorboards like a tuning fork struck too close. I sat up. Hazel's ears twitched. She didn't move. And then something knocked. Not at the front door. Not the windows. The basement. 1 knock, then 2. Slow. Even. then silence. And after a long moment, just long enough to make me wonder if I'd imagined it, I heard something slide across the floor beneath me, like wood on concrete, like something had changed position down there. I didn't move. I couldn't. The sound wasn't loud, but it landed deep, like it had settled inside my rib cage rather than my ears. And it wasn't just noise. It felt deliberate, measured, like someone or something had shifted itself across the concrete to get comfortable. I stayed on the couch for the rest of the night, blanket up to my chest, listening to every tick of the wall clock above the TV. Hazel stayed beside me, pressed closer than before, her body rigid, but still. Not asleep, just alert in that weird, frozen way cats get when they're not sure if they're prey or witness. In the morning, I told myself again it was the pipes. It had to be. Houses do weird things. Temperature shifts, foundation settling. Maybe some kind of animal had gotten into the crawl space. That's what I repeated over coffee as I sat at the kitchen table, not looking at the ceiling. But when I stepped out to get the mail, I found something waiting for me on the porch. A small pile of dirt, just a little mound, like someone had scooped a handful from a garden and left it there. No note, no paw prints, just that silent message, unspoken and totally out of place on the clean concrete. Hazel wouldn't go near it. She stood in the doorway, low to the ground, and hissed once before darting back inside. I swept it into the yard, locked the door, and spent the rest of the day trying to drown everything out with noise. Podcasts, music, phone calls I didn't want to have. Anything to make the house feel smaller and louder and mine again. That night, I moved the couch so it directly faced the basement door. I sat across from it, lights on, laptop open but untouched. At exactly 3:08 a.m., the stairwell light flickered. Not once, not random. It clicked off, on, off again, each time slower than the last, until it finally stayed dark. I stood up. Something inside me cracked then. Not bravery, just exhaustion. A kind of dull acceptance that comes when your fear stops being sharp and starts being familiar. I walked to the door and pressed my ear against it. No humming, no footsteps, just that pressure again. That dense, airless stillness that made me feel like I was the one behind the door, and the house was listening to me. I wrapped my fingers around the knob. It was cold, slick somehow. I turned it gently, just enough to test the latch. It didn't stick. It turned easily, and somewhere behind the door, close but not close enough, I heard breathing. Shallow, wet, wrong, and then something whispered, low and soft, not through the wood but around it, like it had found the gaps between sound. Come see. I didn't open the door. I don't know if that was cowardice or instinct, but something in me said, not yet. I backed away, slow, trying not to breathe too loud, trying not to think too hard about the voice. Not the words, those were simple, but the shape of it, like sound coming from something with lungs that didn't know how to use them. Hazel was gone again. I looked for her after the whisper, but the house felt different, too still. I moved from room to room with the quiet reverence of someone walking through an abandoned building, not a home. Nothing had shifted. Furniture untouched, windows shut, nothing broken. But everything felt rearranged. Not the objects, the space. Like the layout had stayed the same, but the measurements had changed just enough that my brain noticed without understanding. Hallways felt longer. Light switches were a fraction off from where my fingers expected them to be. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even sit down. I stood in the middle of the living room until the light started to return, until I was sure the house had finished whatever it was doing while I wasn't watching. That morning, I found Hazel. She was in the closet of the study, door cracked just wide enough for me to see her eyes glowing back at me. She didn't come when I called, didn't move. She just watched, unblinking, like I'd interrupted something. I closed the door slowly and left her there. Around noon, I heard the basement door creak open. Not violently, not dramatic. Just that slow, careful shift of old hinges pushed by a hand that knows how to move silently. I didn't go to it. I couldn't. I just stood in the hallway, frozen, watching the edge of the door swing wider, millimeter by millimeter until it stopped. Half open, dark beyond the threshold. Nothing came out, but the smell did. Not rot, not mildew, something organic, like wet leaves crushed into stone, like something alive had been kept underground too long and forgotten how to breathe properly. I closed the door. I didn't slam it. I didn't lock it. Just pressed it shut with the flat of my palm and stood there, hand still resting on the wood until I stopped shaking. That night, I dreamed of stairs. Endless, spiraling stairs. Not down, not up, just circling, always turning, no rail, no walls, just me and the sound of something below keeping pace. Not rushing, not chasing, just matching me step for step, breath for breath. When I woke up, Hazel was on my chest, staring down, and the words I'd heard through the door, they were still in my ears. Come see. Except now they'd changed. Now they said, you've already seen. I left the house the next morning, not in a panic, not in a rush. I just packed my laptop, my toothbrush, the charger, and drove until the subdivision disappeared behind trees and distance. I didn't even leave a note. Monica would be back in 3 days, and I figured if she hadn't warned me before, she probably wouldn't care much after. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about that voice, not because of what it said, but because it hadn't felt like a threat. It had felt familiar, like something I'd already agreed to long before I walked through her front door. I stayed in a cheap motel 2 towns over, one of those places with lime green carpet and TVs bolted to the dresser. It felt safe only because it felt unreal, so far removed from the house that nothing there could follow. Or so I thought. That night I heard a knock, not on the door, on the wall. 3 slow knocks. Hollow. Deliberate. Same rhythm I'd heard on the basement door. I sat up in bed, heart quiet, like it already knew how this would go. I turned off the TV. The room didn't feel like mine anymore. The walls felt thinner, and the air had that same weight to it, that subtle shift in pressure that meant something was in the room even if I couldn't see it. I didn't check the wall. I just sat there, waiting. And eventually, it stopped. The next day, I texted Monica. I told her everything. Well, almost everything. I mentioned the hum, the basement door, the photographs. I told her I was sorry I left early, that I didn't feel right staying. I didn't expect a reply, but she did reply. A single message. Did it speak to you? No follow-up, no context, just that. I didn't answer. What was the point? I don't know what Monica knew. I don't know if she ever really left for Portugal. I don't know if she even existed beyond that Zoom call and the note on the kitchen chalkboard. But I know something was in that house. Still is, probably. This happened 2 years ago, when I was living alone in a 1-bedroom apartment above a bookstore in Chicago. The place was technically in Logan Square, but right at the edge where it bleeds into a much quieter neighborhood, the kind with overgrown backyards, garages that leaned slightly with age, and that mix of vinyl siding and red brick that tells you a building's been through 3 or 4 lives already. My apartment was fine. A little drafty, radiator heat that either didn't turn on or didn't turn off, a faucet that squealed like a stuck pig when I ran the hot water. But the rent was reasonable, and I liked the view. The back of the building faced a narrow alley that ran between 2 parallel rows of apartments. Directly across from me was another unit, maybe 30 feet away, second floor like mine. The curtains were always open. It wasn't something I paid much attention to at first, just another window in a grid of windows, all of us quietly living our lives parallel to one another. It was subtle at first. I'd glance up from my laptop and catch a woman standing there. Thin, dark hair, oversized sweatshirt. She'd be at her window, staring into mine. She'd give me a small wave. Not frantic, not beckoning, just present. The first few times I waved back. Seemed rude not to. She never smiled, never mouthed anything. Just that same slow wave and blank stare. After about a week of this, I asked my neighbor about her. Kelsey, who lived next door and had been in the building longer than anyone. "Oh," she said, pausing like she was trying to remember a name that wasn't quite there. "You mean the girl in 2B across the alley?" I nodded. Kelsey's face went a little still. That place has been empty for months, maybe longer. I thought it was getting gutted. I laughed, assuming she was mistaken. "No, she's there most nights. Just stands at the window." Kelsey shook her head. "Nah. Last I heard, it had a plumbing issue. They shut the water off completely. No one's been in or out." That night, I watched the window. She was there again just after 10 p.m. Her wave was slower this time, almost uncertain, like she wasn't sure I could still see her. I didn't wave back. I just stared. And for the first time, she blinked. Not like a normal blink. It was a little too long, a little too slow, like she was thinking about what came after. Then, without moving her hand, she turned her head just slightly and looked to something behind her, deeper in the room, something I couldn't see. And when she turned back to face me, her hand was still raised, but she wasn't waving anymore. She was pointing at what I don't know. There was nothing of note behind me, so clearly she was pointing directly at me, but I don't know why. That was the time I ever saw her, and apparently the only one who ever saw her at all. My family and friends always get quiet and give me that "are you all right" look when I tell them this story. But I know what I saw. You know how every office has that one person? The one everyone talks about on Slack, but no one says anything to their face? The one who hovers just a little too long at the coffee machine or sends emails that sound like they were written by a chatbot from 2009? LOL. Yep. Ours was named Dennis. The job was in a small marketing firm in downtown Chicago. Dennis got hired about 6 months after I came. He was some last-minute addition to the analytics team. We weren't a big company, maybe about 40 people total. And the office was one of those modern, renovated loft-style spaces with exposed brick and way too many glass walls. Everyone sat in open-air cubicles except for leadership. No private offices, no doors to shut. So when someone had weird energy, you felt it. I remember the first morning Dennis showed up. He arrived 30 minutes early, which fine, plenty of people do that. But he just sat at his desk. No computer set up yet, no paperwork in front of him. Just sitting there, hands folded neatly in his lap, staring at nothing. Most new hires get shuffled around, introduced to people, given a tour. Dennis didn't. I don't know if it was an oversight, or if he'd already made it clear he wasn't the social type. But by noon, it was like he'd always been there. No one really talked to him. He didn't eat lunch in the break room. He didn't join the after-work happy hours. He just existed in the office. And to top it off, he sat in the worst cubicle. It was the one tucked in the far corner by the emergency exit, half hidden behind a concrete pillar. That spot had been empty for months because everyone said the Wi-Fi sucked back there, but Dennis took it without a single complaint. For a while, I thought he was just shy or maybe awkward. We've all worked with people who don't do small talk, who eat lunch at their desks and keep to themselves, but there was something about Dennis that didn't feel like introversion. It more felt like watching a statue breathe. The first weird thing I noticed was how he never blinked when he looked at you. Not in that dead-eyed way some people do, but in this unsettling, laser-focused way. Like he'd chosen to see you, and once he did, you couldn't unsee him. The second weird thing was his emails. Every time I finished a project, no matter how minor, Dennis would send me a one-line message. "Good job, I saw that." No signature, no follow-up. Like, what exactly are you referring to? At first, I thought maybe he was trying to be friendly but didn't know how to. But the more time went on and I got those emails, the more they felt like something a warning. I tried not to let Dennis bother me at first. We all know how corporate environments can get. You know, you sit next to someone for 8 hours a day and start noticing every tiny thing they do. You overanalyze, you make up stories. So I told myself that's all this was. But it kept getting harder to ignore all of it. Dennis was an extremely predictable person. Every morning, he walked in at exactly 8:17 a.m. Never earlier, never later. He didn't stop for coffee. He didn't chat with anyone. He walked straight to his desk, sat down, and didn't move until noon. At 12 o'clock on the dot, he stood up, walked to the break room, opened the fridge, and pulled out a sandwich wrapped in wax paper, mind you. And to top it off, it was the same sandwich every day. A turkey and cheese on wheat. No bag, no beverage, nothing else. He sat back down, ate in exactly 10 minutes, wiped his mouth with a paper napkin he folded into a perfect square, and then went back to work. You'd think a routine like that would be comforting, something you could depend on, like clockwork. But the more I watched, the more it felt weird. Like he wasn't doing it out of habit, more like he was following instructions. Oh, and the emails kept coming too, always short, and after I finished something. Not just the big projects. I'd get them after small, stupid tasks like replying to a client or organizing a file folder. Once, I got an email after I refilled the printer paper. "Good job, I saw that." It wasn't flattering. It felt like surveillance. About a month in, I finally mentioned it to someone, my friend Stacy from accounts, who sat across the aisle and had a habit of noticing things before anyone else. She rolled her eyes when I brought it up. "Oh, that's just Dennis," she said. "He's weird, but harmless." Harmless? I wanted to believe that so bad, but every Friday, after everyone else had cleared out, I'd stay late to finish up reports. And every Friday, Dennis would stay too. Not working, just sitting there, facing his monitor, hands still, screen black. The first couple times, I assumed he was finishing something. But when I glanced over my cubicle wall, he wasn't typing or moving his mouse like he usually does. He was just sitting and looking at me, as I said before. The thing about Dennis was that everything he did felt like it was deliberate, not efficient, not absent-minded. Deliberate. So when I caught him staring at me from behind his monitor that Friday, it wasn't like he'd zoned out or happened to glance my way. It felt intentional, too. The first time it happened, I brushed it off. Maybe he was zoning out after a long week. Maybe he was one of those people who stares into space without realizing it. I told myself all the reasonable things you tell yourself when something creeps you out, because the alternative felt ridiculous. But it just kept happening every Friday night, without fail. I'd be the last one in the office, finishing up invoices or end-of-week reports, and Dennis would still be there. Same posture, same black screen, same unnerving stillness. Like he'd powered down, but left something running behind his eyes. It wasn't until the fourth Friday that I realized he never even packed up. Everyone else had laptops or notebooks or something they'd shuffle together at the end of the day. Not Dennis. His workspace looked like a placeholder, something like the cubicle equivalent of a hotel room. The only thing on his desk was his monitor, keyboard, and a small black notebook that he kept tucked neatly in the corner. And here's the part that made my stomach turn. One night, after he finally left, after he stood up without glancing at me, walked toward the elevator without saying a word, I walked past his cubicle on my way out and didn't see the notebook on his desk. But when I checked the next morning, it was back in the same exact spot. So the next Monday, I casually asked around about Dennis to Stacy, a couple people on the design team, even HR when I dropped off some forms. And every time I got the same answer. Oh, Dennis? Yeah, he's quiet. Keeps to himself. Nobody thought it was weird, but also else got the emails. That's when I realized it wasn't just that Dennis was creepy. It was that he had made himself invisible to everyone else except for me. After that, it became harder to focus on my actual job. I kept catching myself glancing toward the corner cubicle, even when I knew Dennis wasn't there. And when he was there, I couldn't stop tracking him. Every movement, every pause, every time his eyes flicked over to me like I'd triggered some silent alarm. The emails kept coming, though, always the same. Good job, I saw that. I stopped opening them. One Tuesday afternoon, after a meeting that ran long, I came back to my desk and found something new. A folded piece of paper slipped just far enough under my keyboard that it wasn't immediately noticeable. "You're paying attention?" was all it said. No signature, no smiley face. Just that one sentence in sharp, straight handwriting I'd never seen before, but I knew exactly who it was from. I didn't say anything to HR. I didn't file a complaint. Because how do you explain that someone's creeping you out without being able to point to anything concrete? It wasn't harassment. It wasn't illegal. It was just creepy. The following Friday, I stayed late again. I wanted to see if he'd do it. Sit there like before. Watch. Maybe I should have just went home, to be honest. Sure enough, when 6 o'clock rolled around and the office emptied out, Dennis stayed put. And this time he was not looking at me directly, but through me, like he was watching something only he could see. I worked slower that night, dragging out the invoices I could have finished in half an hour. I kept waiting for him to leave first. He didn't. At 7:22 p.m., he finally stood up. No sound, no stretch, no sign that he'd been sitting for over an hour without moving. He walked toward the elevator without looking at me, and when the doors closed behind him, I stood and walked straight to his desk. I wasn't sure what I expected to find. Maybe something concrete that would justify how wrong this whole thing felt. This time, though, the black notebook was still there. I hesitated, fingers hovering above it like touching it might trigger something. Then I opened it. Every single page was filled with handwriting, and every single page had the same sentence written over and over. "I see you." I stood there for way too long, flipping through that notebook, watching page after page blur past with the same sentence. It was as if Dennis had been training his hand to repeat it without thinking. There were no dates, no headings, no other notes. Just that phrase over and over. When I finally snapped the notebook shut, my hands were shaking. I wasn't even scared exactly. It was something else. Like realizing you've walked into a room and the door locked behind you without you noticing. I left it exactly where I found it, but I took pictures. That weekend, I tried to put it out of my head. Told myself maybe it was some weird coping mechanism. Maybe he had OCD or he was lonely, socially awkward, trying to make contact in the only way he knew how. But to be real, it wasn't the notebook that scared me. It was the fact that no one else seemed to notice. Monday morning, Dennis came in at 8:17 a.m., sharp as usual. He nodded at me as he passed my cubicle like we were in on something now. The emails started coming more frequently. Not just after I finished work, but random times. Middle of the day. Middle of the night. Good job. I saw that. You're paying attention. Don't look away. Once at 2:37 a.m. I got, I'm still watching. That's when I stopped sleeping properly. I stopped staying late. I avoided the break room. I took longer routes around the office so I wouldn't have to pass his cubicle. And every time I glanced toward that corner, he was already looking. One Thursday, about 2 months after all this started, I went to log into my work computer and noticed a Polaroid taped under my keyboard. It was of me, sitting at my desk, head down, focused, no timestamp, no caption. But it wasn't from any company event. I'd never seen it before. The angle was wrong too. It wasn't taken from the hallway or the kitchen or even the next cubicle over. It was taken from Dennis's desk. Ugh. I walked straight to HR that morning. No more hesitation. I showed them the emails, the photo, the note. They promised to look into it, but that was the last day I ever saw him. At first, everyone thought he'd quit. Stacy from accounts said she saw him clearing out his desk that afternoon. But when I pressed her for details, she got weirdly vague. Said she only caught a glimpse. Said it looked like he'd left everything behind except that little black notebook. A few people whispered that maybe he'd been let go quietly. Something about not fitting in, but no one really knew. I should have felt relief, but I just felt something heavier. Like the weight wasn't lifted, it just shifted somewhere I couldn't see. Things went back to normal. No weird emails, no folded notes, no one staring at me from across the office like I was under a microscope. Finally, I felt safe. About a month after Dennis disappeared, Stacy came running to my desk. She showed me an article with Dennis's face on it. It said that Dennis had brutally killed a woman in his office. Apparently, Dennis was stalking the woman and kept creeping out. According to the article, a man in the office saw the woman walk up to Dennis, and Dennis just began to brutally attack her. I'm guessing Dennis wanted a reaction, and then once he got it, he would begin to attack. I do not trust anyone who sits at that desk now.